balcony. Okay. Fine, I'll say the bloody. I don't like saying that one. But whatever. We're going to just wait 1 second, Mocheli, for the people to join. Hmm. One more minute before we start the stream anyways. Oh, fuck. 1 second. That's right, um... My apologies, Mocheli. I accidentally forgot to fix my stream information before starting stream. That's embarrassing, but you know, it happens. Wait, is it working? Okay, good, it's still working. Okay. Nalekshona Dweev Mocheli. I think I pronounced that right. It's hard to tell because I'm pronouncing Old Irish like it's. I'm pronouncing Modern Irish like it's Old Irish. But I don't know if that's how it's spelled in Old Irish. It's your favorite duo, Olive, and today we're going to be reading some Christmas stories. I do wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, of course. This is going to be one of the shorter ones. We're going to be reading quite a few texts. We're going to be reading, well, actually, we're going to be reading about 3 texts. "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," "How the Grinch Stole Christmas," if I can find the fucking book. Sorry about that. And then "A Christmas Carol." This is because I literally forgot every single Christmas story to ever exist the moment this happened. This will be our last stream of the year, as I will be stopping streaming for about the week of Christmas to celebrate with family, because I feel like they would be annoyed if I was streaming during this time. And I'll probably be back sometime, maybe on the New Year's, or maybe after. However, I will be trying to make space for all of my friends who are trying to stream on Christmas, to make sure that they have someone there for them, because some of my friends will not be out for Christmas. I'll be sure to tell everyone to go join their stream. Alright, well, without further ado, let's begin with a visit from St. Nicholas. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care. I hope, oh hello Queen, in hopes that Saint Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their head. And Mamma in her kerchief, and I in my cap, had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Hello, Queen, how are you? Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave a lustre of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sleigh with 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment he must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles his course they came, and whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer, now Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys and Saint Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head, and turning around, down the chimney Saint Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. A stump of pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon he gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings and turned with a jerk. Laying a finger aside his nose, he gave a little nod. Up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew, the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere drove out of sight, Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night. And it was the night before Christmas, or a vision of Saint Nick. I hope that sounds good to you. I hope my audio didn't like rip itself apart. But also, oh, wait 1 second. But also, hello Queen, how are you feeling today? You doing well? Is the audio good? Am I too loud for you? I'm gonna have to borrow this. Alright, chat. The next text for our journey is How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Let us begin. Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot, but the Grinch who lived north of Whoville did not. The Grinch hated Christmas the whole Christmas season. Now please don't ask why, no one quite knows the reason. It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be perhaps that his shoes were too tight. But I think the most likely reason of all may have been that his heart was 2 sizes too small. But whatever the reason, his heart or his shoes, he stood there on Christmas Eve hating the Whos, staring down from his cave with a sour, grinchy frown at the warm lighted windows below in their town. For he knew every Who down in Whoville beneath was busy now hanging mistletoe wreath. And they're hanging their stockings, he snarled with a sneer. Tomorrow is Christmas, it's practically here. Then he growled with his Grinch fingers nervously drumming, I must find some way to stop Christmas from coming. For tomorrow he knew all the Who girls and Who boys would wake up bright and early, they would rush for their toys. And then, oh, the noise, the noise, the noise, the noise. That's one thing he hated. The noise, 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 noise. Then the Who, young and old, would sit down to a feast. And they'd feast and they'd feast. They'd feast, 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 feast. They'd feast on Who pudding and rare Who roast beast. Which was something the Grinch couldn't stand in the least. And then they'd do something he liked least of all. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, would stand close together with Christmas bells ringing. They'd stand hand in hand, and the Whos would start singing. And they'd sing and sing, and they'd sing. And they'd sing, 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 sing. And the Grinch, and the more the Grinch thought of this Who Christmas sing, the more the Grinch thought, I must stop this whole thing. Why, for 50 years I've put up with it now. I must stop this Christmas from coming. But how? Then he got an idea, an awful idea. The Grinch got a wonderful, awful idea. I know just what to do, the Grinch laughed in his throat. And he made a quick Santa Claus hat and coat. And he chuckled and clucked. What a great Grinchy trick! With this fur coat and his hat, I look just like Saint Nick. All I need is a reindeer. But the Grinch looked around. But since reindeer are scarce, there was none to be found. Did that stop the old Grinch? No, the Grinch simply said. If I can't find a reindeer, I'll make one instead. So he called his dog Max, and then he took some red thread, and he tied a big horn onto the top of his head. Then he looked down at some bags, and some old empty sacks, on a ramshackle sleigh, and then he hitched up old Max. Then the Grinch said, Get up, giddy up! And the sleigh started down towards the homes where the Whos lay a snooze in their town. All their windows were dark, white snow filled the air. All the Whos were all dreaming, sweet dreams without care. When he came to the first little house on the square, this is stop number 1, the old Grinch Claus hissed, and he climbed up to the roof, empty bag in his fist. Then he slid down the chimney, a rather tight pinch. But if Santa could do it, then so could the Grinch. He got stuck only once for a moment or two, and then stuck his head out of the fireplace flue, where the little Who stockings were all hung in a row. These stockings, he grinned, are the first thing to go. He then slithered and slunk with a smile most unpleasant around the whole room, and he took every present, pop guns and bicycles, roller skates and drums, checkerboards, tricycles, popcorn and plums. Who gets popcorn for Christmas? And he stuffed them in bags. Then the Grinch very nimbly stuffed all the bags one by one up the chimney. Then he slunk to his icebox. He took the Who feast, took the Who pudding, he took the roast beast. He cleaned out that icebox as quick as a flash. Why, that Grinch even took the last can of Who hash. It's a Who hash. Then he stuffed the food up the chimney with glee. And now, grinned the Grinch, I will stuff up the tree. And the Grinch grabbed the tree and he started to shove when he heard a small sound like the coo of a dove. He turned around fast and he saw a small Who, little Cindy Lou Who was no more than 2. The Grinch had been caught by this tiny Who daughter, who'd got out of bed for a cup of cold water. She stared at the Grinch and said, Santa Claus, why are you taking our Christmas tree? Why? But you know that old Grinch was so smart and slick. He thought up a lie, he thought it up quick. Why, my sweet little tot, the fake Santa Claus lied. There's a light in this chimney that won't light on one side. So I'm taking to my home, to my workshop, my dear. I'll fix it up there and I'll bring it back here. And his fib fooled the child, and he patted her head, and he got her a drink and he sent her to bed. And when Cindy Lou Who went to bed with her cup, He went to the chimney and stuffed the tree up. Then the last thing he took was the log for the fire. Then he went up the chimney himself, the old liar. On the walls have nothing but hooks and some wire. And the one speck of food that he left on the house was a crumb that was even too small for a mouse. Then he did the same things to the other who's house, leaving crumbs much too small for the other who's mouse. It was 4:15 and all the who's still abed, all the who's still asnooze when he packed up his sled, packed it up with their presents, the nib, the ribbons, the wrappings, the tags and the tinsels, the trimmings and the trappings. 3,000 feet up to the side of Mount Crumpet, he rode with his load to the tip-top to the dump it. Pooh to the who. Okay. To the who's, he said, grinchiously humming. They're finding out now no Christmas is coming. They're just waking up, I know just what they'll do. Their mouths will hang open a minute or two. Then the who's down at Hoover will all cry boo-hoo. That's a noise, the Grinch, that I must simply hear. So he paused and the Grinch put his hand to one ear. And he did hear a sound over the snow. It started in low, then started to grow. But the sound wasn't sad, why the sound was merry. I'm well. To be honest, I actually really like the Grinch movie. I think people don't like it. I don't remember if they do or don't. This couldn't be so, but it was merry, very merry. He stared down at Whoville, the Grinch popped his eyes. Then he shook. What he saw was a shocking surprise. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, was singing without any presents at all. He hadn't stopped Christmas from coming, it came. Somehow or other, it's just the same. And the Grinch with his Grinch feet, ice cold in the snow, stood puzzling. How could it be so? It came without ribbons, it came without tags, it came without packages, boxes, or bags. And he stood 3 hours till Puzzler was sore. Then the Grinch thought something he hadn't before. Merry Christmas, he thought. Doesn't come from a store. Merry Christmas, perhaps, means a little more. And what happened then? Well, in Hoover they say that the Grinch's small heart grew 3 sizes that day. And the minute his heart didn't feel quite so tight, he whizzed with a load through the bright morning light, and he brought back the toys and the food for the feast, and he himself, the Grinch, carved the roast beast. And that was how the Grinch Stole Christmas chat. I really liked the movie. I'm pretty sure people don't like the movie, or that might have been Cat in the Hat, actually. And I hope you all enjoyed that one. We're going on to our last one, but this will be the longest. It is A Christmas Carol. It is a story of Ebenezer Scrooge. So I hope you all really look forward to this one. This will be the final story we read because I don't have any other stories. Unless someone in chat would like a story, I will just be continuing. Is this A Christmas Carol? By Charles Dickens? Okay then. I don't remember this opening, the story of Scrooge, but alright then. A Christmas Carol, Stave 1, Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, and the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it, and Scrooge's name was good upon change, for anything, but he chose to put his hand too. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Mind, I don't mean to say that I know, of my own knowledge, that there is a particularly dead about a door what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade, but the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unshallowed hands shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead, Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, and his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legate, his sole friend and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully caught up by the sad event, but that was but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I am going to relate. If we were not perfectly convinced that Hamlet's father died before the play began, there would be nothing more than remarkable in his taking a stroll at night, in an easterly wind, upon his own ramparts, and there would be in any other middle-aged gentleman rashly turning out after dark in a breezy spot, say St. Paul's churchyard, for instance, literally to astonish his son's weak mind. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterwards, above the warehouse door, Scrooge O'Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge O'Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge, and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheeks, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his lips thin blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head, and on his eyebrows and his weary chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his office and dog days, and didn't for it 1 degree at Christmas. If you don't know, chat, dog days are the days that Sirius arises, because they're known as being very hot at some time, and I don't actually remember when Sirius rises. External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, nor wintry weather chill him. No wind that blew was bitterer than he. No falling snow was more intent upon his purpose. No pelting rain less open to entreaty. Foul weather didn't know where to have him. The heaviest rain and snow and hail and sleet could boast of the advantage over him in only one respect. They often came down handsomely, and Scrooge never did. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with a gladsome look, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle, no children asked him what was o'clock. No man or woman ever come once in his life inquired the way to such and such place of Scrooge. Even the blindsman's dogs appeared to know him. When they saw him coming, they would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eyes at all is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. What was the knowing ones call nuts to Scrooge? Once upon a time, of all good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, and bitter, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts, and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3. It was quite dark already. It had not been light all day, and the candles were flaring up in the windows of the neighboring offices, like ruddy smears upon palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole. Sorry, the print's a bit weird. And was so dense without, that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. To see that dingy cloud come trooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard by, and that was brewed on a large scale. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very small, so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, his nephew Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked again. Christmas a humbug, Uncle. Christmas a humbug, Uncle, said Scrooge's nephew. You don't mean that, I am sure. I do, said Scrooge. Merry Christmas? What right do you have to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough. Come then, returned the nephew gaily. What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough. Scrooge, having no better answer ready on the spur of the moment, said, Bah! again, and followed up with humbug. Don't be cross, uncle, said the nephew. What else can I be, returned the uncle, when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas, out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for pay bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer? A time for balancing your books and having every item in them for around a dozen months presented dead against you? If I could work my will, said Scrooge indignantly, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding, and buried with a stick of holly through his heart. He should. Uncle, pleaded the nephew. Nephew, returned the uncle sternly. Sorry. Keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine. Keep it, replied Scrooge's nephew. But you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone, then, said Scrooge. Much good it may do you, much good it has ever done you. There are many, there are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, returned the nephew. Christmas among the rest. But I'm sure I've always thought of Christmas time, when it has come around, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin. If anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, then a time I know of, in the long calendar of the year, when men and women seem by one consent to open up their shut hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say, God bless it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded, becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety. He poked the fires and extinguished the last frail spark forever. Let me hear another sound from you, said Scrooge, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite a powerful speaker, sir, he added, turning to his nephew. I wonder why you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow. Scrooge said he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went to the whole length of the expression, said he would see him in that extremity first. But why? Cried Scrooge's nephew. Why? Why did you get married? Said Scrooge. Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love, cried Scrooge, as if that was the only thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. Nay, uncle. But you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon. said Scrooge. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been party. But I have made the trial homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon, said Scrooge, and a Happy New Year. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. His nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding. He stopped at the outer door to bestow a greeting of the season on the clerk, who, cold as the yours, was warmer than Scrooge, who returned them cordially. There's another fellow, muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. My clerk, with 15 shillings a week, and a wife and a family, talking about Merry Christmas. I retire to Bedlam. This lunatic, and letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley, I believe, said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge and Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead for 7 years, Scrooge replied. He died 7 years ago, this very night. We have no doubt his liberty is well represented by a surviving partner, said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. That ominous word liberality, I don't know what that means. Scrooge frowned and shook his head and handed his credentials back. At the fattest season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, said the gentleman, taking up the pen, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities, hundreds of thousands are in want of common comfort, sir. Are there no prisons? asked Scrooge. Plenty of prisons, said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. And the Union workhouses? Demanded Scrooge. Are they still in operation? They are still, returned the gentleman. I wish I could say they were not. The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigour, then, said Scrooge. Both are very busy, sir. I was afraid from what you said at first, that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course, said Scrooge. I'm very glad to hear it. Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christmas cheer of the mind and body to the multitude, returned the gentleman, a few of us are endeavouring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink, and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time, of all others, when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What should I put you down for? Nothing, replied Scrooge. You wish to be anonymous? I wish to be left alone, said Scrooge. Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishment I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die. If they would rather die, said Scrooge, they had better do it, and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know what that. But you might know it, observed the gentleman. It's not my business, Scrooge returned. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue their point, the gentleman withdrew. Scrooge resumed his labours with an improved opinion of himself, and in a more facetious temper than what was usual with him. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened so that people ran about with flaring lamps, proffering their services to go before horses and carriages, and conduct them on their way. The ancient tower of a church, whose gruff bell was always peeping slyly down at Scrooge out of Gothic window in the wall, became invisible, and struck the hours and quarters in the clouds, with tremendous vibrations afterwards, as if its teeth were chattering in its frozen head up there. The cold became intense. In the main street at the corner of the court, some labourers were repairing the gas pipers, and had lighted a great fire in the brazier, around which a party of ragged men and boys were gathered. warming their hands and winking their eyes before the blaze in rapture. The water plug being lax in solitude, its overflowing solemnly congealed, and turned to misanthropic ice. The brightness of the slopes where the holly sprigs and berries crackled in the lamp heat of the windows made pale faces ruddy as they passed. Torturers and grocers' trades became a splendid joke, a glorious pageant with which it was too impossible to believe that such dull principles as bargain and sale had anything to do. The Lord Mayor, in the stronghold of the mighty mansion house, gave orders to his 50 cooks and butlers to keep Christmas as the Lord Mayor's household should, and even the little tailor, whom he had fined 5 shillings on the previous Monday for being drunk and bloodthirsty in the streets, set up tomorrow's pudding in his garret, while his lean wife and baby sallied out to buy the beef. For it grew yet colder, piercing, searching, biting cold. If the good Saint Dunstan had but nipped the evil spirit's nose with a touch of such weather as that, instead of using his familiar weapons, then indeed he would have roared to lusty purpose. The owner of one scant nose, gnawed and mumbled by the hungry cold as his bones are gnawed by dogs, stopped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. But the sound of "God bless you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay," grew seized the ruler of such energy of action, the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog, an even more congenial frost. At length the hour of shutting the counting-house arrived, and the ill-will Scrooge dismounted from his stool, tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. "You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose?" said Scrooge. "If quite convenient, sir." "It's not convenient," said Scrooge, "and it's not fair. If I was to stop a half-a-crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound." The clerk smiled faintly. "And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for your work." The clerk observed it was only once a year. "A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning up his greatcoat to the chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with long ends of his white comforter dangled below his waist, for he boasted no green coat, went down a slide on the cornhill at the end of the lane of boys, 20 times in honor of its being Christmas Eve, and then ran home to the Camden Town as hard as he could pelt, to play at blindsman's buff. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read the newspapers, and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker books, he went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. He is certainly gay for Marley. They were a gloomy suite of rooms, in a lowering pile of building up a yard, where it had so little business to be, that one could scarcely help fancying it must have run there when it was a young house, playing hide and seek with the other houses, and had forgotten the way again. It was old enough now and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge. And the rooms being all let out of offices, the yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope at with his hands. The fog and frost so hung about the black old gateways of the house, that it seemed as if the genius of weather sat in the mournful meditation on the threshold. Now it is a fact that there was nothing at all particular about the knocker on his door, except that it was very large. It was also a fact that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. Also that Scrooge had as little of what had as little of what is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London, even including, which is a bold word for the corporation, alderman, and livery. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley, and the mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock on his door, saw the knocker without its undergoing any intermediate process of change. Not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not an impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up upon its ghostly forehead. The hair was a curious stir, as if by breath of hot air, and through the eyes were wide open. They were perfectly motionless. That and its livid color made it horrible. But its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control, rather than part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixed at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand on the key he had relinquished, turned it steadily, and walked in, with lighted his candle. He did pause with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified at the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door except the screws and nuts that held the locker on, so he said "Pooh, pooh," and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. Every room above and every cask in the wine merchant's cellar below appeared to have a separate peal of echoes of its own. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door and walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. You might talk vaguely about driving a coach and six up an old flight of stairs, or through a bad young Act of Parliament, but I mean to say you might have got a hearse up that staircase, and taken it broadwise with the splinter bar forward towards the wall, and the door towards the balustrades, and done it easy. There was plenty wood for that, and the room to spare, which is perhaps the reason why Scrooge thought he saw a locomotive hearse going on before him in the gloom. A dozen gas lamps out of the street wouldn't have lighted the entry too well, so you may suppose it was pretty dark with Scrooge's dip. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for that. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his room to see it was all right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Sitting... 1 second. Is this important? No? Am I just holding up chat for no reason? Are you streaming? Okay. Sorry about that, chat. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table, nobody under the sofa. A small fire in the grate, spoon and basin ready, and the little saucepan of gruel. Scrooge had a coal in his head, upon the hob. Nobody under the bed, nobody in the closet, nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious altitude between the wall against the wall. Lumber room as usual, old fire guard, old shoes, 2 fish baskets, washing hand on 3 legs and a poker. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers, and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. It was a very, very low fire indeed, often on such a bitter night. He was obliged to sit close to it, and brood over it, before he could extract the least sensation of warmth from such a handful of fuel. The fire was an old one, built by some Dutch merchant long ago, and paved all around with quaint Dutch tiles, designed to illustrate the scriptures. There were Cains and Abels, Pharaoh's daughters, queens of Sheba, angelic messengers descending through the air on clouds like feather beds, Abraham, Belshazzar's, apostles putting off to sea in butter boats, hundreds of figures to attract his thoughts. And yet that face of Marley, 7 years dead, came to him like an ancient prophet's rod, and swallowed up whole, the whole. If each smooth tile had been a blank at first, the power to shape some picture on its surface from the disjointed fragments of his thoughts, it would have been a copy of Marley's head on every one. Humbug, said Scrooge, and walked across the room. After several turns, he sat down again as he threw his head back in the chair. His glance happened to rest upon a bell, a disused bell that hung in the room and communicated for some purpose now forgotten. It was a chamber in the highest floor of the building. It was with great astonishment, and with a strange inexplicable dread, that as he looked, he saw his bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, and soon it rang loudly, and so did every bell in the house. This might have lasted half a minute or a minute, but it seemed an hour. The bells ceased as they had begun together, and they were succeeded by a clunky noise deep down, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain over the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Scrooge then remembered to have heard the ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. The cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise much louder on the floors below, and then coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards the door. So I needed the drink. It's humbug still, said Scrooge. I won't believe it. His colour changed though, when without a pause it came on through the heavy door, and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming, the dying flames leaped up as though it cried, I know him, Marley's ghost, and fell again. The same face, the very same, Marley in his pigtail usual waistcoat tights and boots, and the tassels on the latter bristling like his pigtails, and his coatskins, and the hair upon his head. The chains he drew were clasped about his middle. It was long, and the wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the two buttons on his coat behind him. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he had never believed it until now. No, nor did he believe it now, though he looked the phantom through and through, and he saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its deathly old eyes, and marked the very texture of his folded handkerchief. I don't know why it's just called kerchief, bound about its head and chin, which rapture he had not observed before. He was incredulous and fought against his senses. How now, said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. What do you want with me? Much, Marley's voice. No doubt about it. Who are you? Ask me who I was. Who were you then? Said Scrooge, raising his voice. You're particular for a shade. He was going to say, to a shade, but substituted this. Was more appropriate. In life I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Can you sit down? Asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. I can. Do it, then. Scrooge asked the question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair, and felt that in the event of its being impossible, it might involve the necessity of an embarrassing explanation. But the ghost sat down on the opposite of the fireplace, as if it were quite used to it. You don't believe in me, observed the ghost. I don't, said Scrooge. What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses? I don't know, said Scrooge. Why do you doubt your senses? Because, said Scrooge, a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes him cheats. It may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of gravy about you, whatever you are. Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes, nor did he feel in his heart by any means waggish then. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of distracting his own attention and keeping down his terror, but the spectre's voice disturbed the very marrow of his bones. To sit staring at those fixed glazed eyes in silence for a moment would play, Scrooge felt, the very deuce with him. There was something very awful, too, in the spectre's being provided with an infernal atmosphere of its own. Scrooge could not feel it himself, but it was very clearly the case. For though the ghost sat perfectly motionless, its hair and skirt and tassels were still agitated, as if by hot vapour from an oven. You see this toothpick, said Scrooge, returning quickly to the charge for the reason just assigned, and wishing, though it were only for a second, to divert the vision's stunning glaze from itself. I do, replied the ghost. You are not looking at it, said Scrooge. But I see it, said the ghost, notwithstanding. Well, returned Scrooge, I have but to swallow this, and for the rest to be of my days persecuted by a legion of goblins. All my own creation. Humbug, I tell you, humbug. At this the ghost raised a frightful cry and shook his chains with such dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge held tight to his chair to save himself from falling into a swoon. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom began to take off the bandages around his head, as if it were too warm to wear indoors, and lowered his jaw dropping down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. Mercy, he said. Dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me? A man of the worldly mind, replied the ghost. Do you believe in me or not? I do, said Scrooge, I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me? It is required of every man, the ghost returned, that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men, and travel far and wide, and that if the spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so in death. It is doomed to wander through the world. Oh, woe is me! And to witness what it cannot, or might have shared on earth, and turned to happiness. Again the spectre raised a cry and shook its chain, and wrung its shadowy hands. You are fettered, said Scrooge, trembling. Tell me why. I wear the chains I forged in life, replied the ghost. I made it link by link, and yard by yard. I girded it on my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you? Scrooge trembled, and more. Or would you know, said the ghost, the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was for as heavy as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have laboured on it since. Is this a ponderous chain? Scrooge glanced about him on the floor, in expectation of finding himself surrounded by some 50 or 60 fathoms of iron cable, but he could see nothing. Jacob, he said imploringly. Oh, Jacob Marley, tell me. Sweet comfort to me, Jacob. I have none to give, the ghost replied. It comes from other regions, Ebenezer Scrooge, and is conveyed by other ministers to other kinds of men. Nor can I tell you that I would. A very little more is all permitted to me. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, in my life, my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. It was a habit with Scrooge whenever he became thoughtful to put his hand in his breeches pockets. Pondering what the ghost had said, he did so now, without lifting up his eyes again getting off his knees. You must have been very slow about it, Jacob, Scrooge observed in a businesslike manner, though with humility and deference. Slow, the ghost repeated. 7 years dead, amused Scrooge, and travelling all the time. The whole time, said the ghost. No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse. You travel fast? Said Scrooge. On the wings of the wind, replied the ghost. You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years, said Scrooge. The ghost, upon hearing this, set up another cry and clanked his chains so hideously in the dead silence of the night that the ward had been justified in indicting it for nuisance. Oh, captive bound in doubled iron, cried the phantom, not to know what ages of incessant labour by mortal creatures. This earth must pass into eternity before the good of which it is susceptible is all developed. Not to know that any Christian spirit working kindly in its little sphere, whatever it may be, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness. Not to know that no space of 1 second regret can make amends for one's life opportunities misused. And yet such was I, oh, such was I. But you're always a good man of business, Jacob, faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. Business, cried Jacob, wringing his hands again. Mankind was my business, the common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop in the water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. It held its chains at arm's length, as if they were the cause of all its unveiling grief, and flung its heavily upon the ground again. All this time of the rolling years, said the spectre, I suffered most. What did I walk through crowds of fellow beings with my eyes turned down, and never raise them to that blessed star which led the wise men to a poor abode? Were there no poor homes to which its light would have conducted me? Scrooge was very much dismayed to hear that the spectre was going on at this rate, and began to quake exceedingly. Hear me, said the ghost, my time is nearly gone. I will, said Scrooge. But don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray. How it is that I appear before you in a shape that you can see, I may not tell. I have sat invisible beside you many and many a day. It was not an agreeable idea, Scrooge shivered, and wiped his perspiration from his brow. That is no light part of my penance, pursued the ghost. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance of hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of curing Ebenezer. You are always a good friend to me, said Scrooge. Thank thee. You will be haunted, resumed the ghost, by three spirits. The Scrooge's countenance almost fell as low as the ghost had done. Is that by chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? He demanded in a faltering voice. It is. I think I'd rather not, said Scrooge. Without their visits, said the ghost, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow when the bell tolls one. Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over, Jacob? Said Scrooge. Expect the second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 had ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look that, for your own sake, remember what has passed between us. When he had said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table, and bound it round its head, as before. Scrooge knew this by the smart sound of its teeth made when the jaws were brought together by the bandage. He ventured to raise his eyes again, and found the supernatural visitor confronting him in an erect attitude, the chains around over and about its arm. The apparition walked backwards from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little. But the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach, which he did. When they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped. Not so much in obedience as in surprise and fear, for in raising the hand he became sensible of the confused noise in the air, incoherent sounds of lamentation and regret, wailings and inexpressible sorrow, and self-accusatory. The spirit, after listening for a moment, joined in mournful dirge and floated out upon the bleak dark night. Scrooge followed to the window, desperate in his curiosity, and looked out. And the air was filled with phantoms wandering hither and thither, restless haste, moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. Some few, they might be guilty governments, were linked together. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. They had been quite familiar with one old ghost in a white waistcoat, with a monstrous iron safe attached to his ankle, who cried piteously, had been unable to assist a wretched woman with an infant whom it saw below upon a doorstep. Misery with them all was clearly that they sought to interfere for good in human matters, and had lost their power forever. Whether these creatures had faded into mist, or mist enshrouded them, he could not tell. They and their spirit voices faded together, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window and examined the door by which the ghost had entered, It was double-locked as he had locked it with his own hands, and bound when the bolts were undisturbed. He tried to say humbug, but stopped the first syllable, and being, from the emotion he had undergone, or fatigue of the day, or his glimpse of the invisible world, or the dull conversation of the ghost, or the lateness in the hour, much in need of repose, he went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant. That was stave 1. Now we shall begin stave 2, the first of the 3 ghosts. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was endeavouring to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of a neighbouring church struck the 4 quarters, so he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the heavy bell went from 6 to 7, and from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12, and stopped. 12! It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have got into the works. 12. He touched the spring of his repeater to correct this most preposterous clock. His rapid little pulse beat 12, and it stopped. Why, this is impossible, said Scrooge, that I can have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It is impossible that anything has happened to the sun, and this at 12 at noon. The idea being an alarming one, he scrambled out of bed and groped his way to the window. He was obliged to rub the frost with his sleeve of his dressing gown before he could see anything, and could see very little then. All he could make out that it was still very foggy and extremely cold, and there was no noise of people running to and fro, and making a great stir, and so there unquestionably would have been if the night had beaten off a bright day, and taken possession of the world. This was a great relief, because 3 days after the sight of the first exchange to pay to Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge or his orders and so forth would have become a mere United States security if there were no days to count by. Scrooge went to bed again and thought it over and over, and could make nothing of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was, and the more he endeavoured not to think. The more he thought, Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he resolved within himself, after mature inquiry, that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again like a strong spring released to its first position, and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in this state until the chimes had gone 3 quarters more. He remembered suddenly that the ghost warned him of visitation with the bell-tolled one. He resolved to lie awake until the hour had passed, and considering that he could no more go to sleep than go to heaven, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The quarter was long, that he was more than once convinced that he must have sunk into a doze unconsciously and missed the clock. At length it broke upon his listening ear. Ding dong! A quarter past, said Scrooge, counting. Ding dong! Half-past, said Scrooge. Ding dong! A quarter to-ish, said Scrooge. Ding dong! The hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly, and nothing else. He spoke before the bell sounded, which it now did with a deep, dull sound. Melancholy one, light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, I tell you, by a hand. Not the curtains at his feet, not the curtains at his back, but those to which his face was addressed. The curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge, staring up into the half-recumbent altitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew him, as close to it as I am to you now, and is standing in the spirit at your elbow. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child, as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium which gave him the appearance of having receded from view, and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down to its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it. And tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet most delicately formed, were like those of upper members bare. The word tunic of the purest white, and around its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful, had a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and a singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was, that from the crown on its head there sprung a bright clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its dollar ornaments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held in its arms. Even this, when Scrooge looked at it with increasing steadiness, was not stranger's quality, for as its belt sprinkled with glittered now in one part, and now in another, and what light one instant at another time was dark, so the figure itself fluctuated in its distinctness, being now a thing with one arm, and now one leg, and now with 20 legs, and now with a pair of legs without a head, and now a head without a body, of which dissolving parts no outline could possibly would be visible in the dense gloom wherein they melted away. And now the very wonder of this, it would be itself again, distinct and clear as ever. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge. "I am." The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being close beside him, it were at a distance. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" replied Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. "No, your past." Perhaps Scrooge could not have told anybody why, if anybody could have asked him, but he had a special desire to see the spirit in his cap, and he begged him to be covered. "What?" exclaimed the ghost. "Would you so soon put out, with worldly hands, the light I give? It is not enough that you are one of those whose passions made this cap. It follows me through whole trains of years to wear it low upon my brow." Scrooge reverently disclaimed all intentions to offend, or any knowledge to have wilful bonneted the spirit at any period of his life. He made a bold inquiry what business brought him here. "Your welfare," said the ghost. Scrooge expressed himself much obliged, but could not help but thinking that a night on broken rest would have been more conducive to that end. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation, then. Take heed." It put out his strong hand as it spoke, and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise, and walk with me." It would have been vain for Scrooge to plead that the weather and the hour were not adapted to pedestrian purposes, that the bed was warm and the thermometer a long way below freezing, but he was clad but lightly in his slippers, dressing gown and nightcap, and that he had cold upon him at that time. The grasp, though gentle as a woman's hand, was not to be resisted. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards his window, clasped its robe in supplication. "I am immortal," Scrooge remonstrated, "and liable to fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand there." Sorry. "Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying upon his heart, and and you shall be upheld, and more than this. As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road, with fields on either hand. The city entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist vanished with it. It was clear, cold winter day, with snow upon the ground. "Good heaven!" said Scrooge, clasping his hands together, as he looked about him. "I was bred in this place. I was a boy here." The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present to the old man's senses of feeling. He was conscious of 1,000 odors floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes, and joys and cares long, long forgotten. "Your lips are trembling," said the ghost. "And what is that upon your cheek?" Scrooge muttered with an unusual catching in his voice that it was a pimple, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. "You recollect the way?" inquired the spirit. "Remember it!" cried Scrooge with fervour. "I could walk it blindfold." "Strange I have forgotten for so many years." observed the ghost. Let us go on. They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and posted tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and a winding river. Some shaggy ponies now were seen trotting towards them with boys upon their backs, who called to other boys in country gigs and carts driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air laughed with it. These are but shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. They have no consciousness of us. The jocund travellers came on, and as they came Scrooge knew and named them every one. Why, he rejoiced beyond all bounds to see them. Why did his cold eyes glisten and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at crossroad and byways for several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas, what good had it ever done to him? The school is not yet. The school is not quite deserted, said the ghost. A solitary child neglected by his friends is left there. Scrooge said he knew it and sobbed. They left the high road by a well-remembered lane and soon approached a mansion of dull red brick, with a little weathercock-surmounted cupola on the roof and a bell hanging in it. It was a large house, but one of broken fortunes. For the spacious offices were little used, their walls were damp and mossy, and their windows broken, and their gates decayed. Fowls clucked and strutted in the stables, and coach houses and sheds were overrun with grass. Nor was it more attentive to its ancient state within. Entering the dreary hall and glancing through the open doors for many rooms, they found them poorly furnished and cold and vast. There was an earthly savour in the air, a chilly barrenness in the place which associated itself somehow with too much getting up by candlelight, and not too much to eat. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, upon the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of plain deal forms and desks. At one of these lonely spots, and one of these a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a fork and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he had used to be. Not a latent echo in the house, not a squeak and scuffle from the mice behind the panelling, not a drip from the half-filled waterspout in the dooryard behind, nor a sigh among the leafless boughs of one dependent poplar. That idle swinging of an empty storehouse door, no, not a clicking in the fire, but fell upon the heart of Scrooge with the softening influences, and gave free passage to his ears. The spirit touched him on the arm and pointed to his younger self upon his reading. Suddenly a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distinct, looked at, stood outside the window with an axe stuck in his belt, and laden with wood by the bridle. Why, it's Ali Baba, Scrooge exclaimed in ecstasy. It's dear old honest Ali Baba. Yes, I know. Yes, I know. One Christmas time, when yonder solitary child was left here, all alone, he did come for the first time, just like that. Poor boy, and Valentine, said Scrooge, and his wild brother Orson. There they go. And what's his name, who was put down in his drawers asleep at the gate of Damascus? Did you see him? And the Sultan's groom, turned upside down by the genie. There he is, upon his head. Serve him right, I'm glad of it. What business had he to be married to the princess? To hear Scrooge expanding the earnestness of his nature on such subjects, a more extraordinary voice between laughing and crying, to see his heightened and excited face, would have been surprising to his business friends in the city. Indeed. But there's the parrot, cried Scrooge. Green body and yellow tail, with a thing like a lettuce growing out of the top of his head. There he is, poor Robin Crusoe, he called him. When he came home after sailing around the island. Poor Robin Crusoe. Where have you been, Robin Crusoe? The man thought he was dreaming, but he wasn't. And a parrot, you know. There goes Friday, running for his life to the little creek. Halloa, hoop, halloo! Then rapidly transitioned very far into his usual character. He said in piteous tone himself, "Poor boy," he cried again. "I wish," Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket, looking about him after drying his eyes with the scuff. "But it's too late now." What is the matter?" asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge, "nothing. There was a boy singing Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to give him something, that's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved his hand, saying as it did so, "Let us see another Christmas." Scrooge's former self grew larger at these words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk and the windows cracked. Fragments of plaster fell through the ceiling. The naked laths were shown instead. But how all this was brought about, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so, and that there he was, alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for jolly holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than her brother, came darting in, and put her arms around his neck, and kissing him, addressed him, "Dear, dear brother." "I've come to bring you home, dear brother," said the child, clasping tiny hands and bending down to laugh. "Bring you home, 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 little home, little fan," returned the boy. "Yes," said the child, brimful of glee. "Home for good and all. Home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be, that home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night, when I was going to bed, that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home, and he said yes, you should, and sent me a coach to bring you. And you're to be a man," said the child, opening her eyes, "and they're never coming back here. But first we're to be together the Christmas long, and have merriest time in all the world." "You're quite a woman, little Fan," exclaimed the boy. She clasped her hands and laughed and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again and stood on tiptoes to embrace him, and then began to drag him in her childish eagerness towards her door. And he said nothing, loth to go, accompanied her. A terrible voice in the hall cried, "Bring down Master Scrooge's box there." And in the hall appeared the schoolmaster himself, who glared on Master Scrooge with ferocious condescension, and threw him a dreadful state of mind, shaking hands with him. He then conveyed him and his sister to the veriest old well of the shivering best parlour that ever was seen, where the maps upon the wall, and celestial terrestrial globes in the window, were waxy with cold. Here he produced a decanter of curiously light wine, and a block of curiously heavy cake, and administered instalments of those dainties to the young people, at the same time sending out a meagre servant to offer a glass of something to the postboy. Master said he thanked the gentleman, but if it were the same taps he had tasted before, he would rather not. Master Scrooge being shrunk by being this time tied to the top of the chassis, the children bade the schoolmaster good-bye right willingly, and getting into it, drove gaily down the garden sweep, the quick wheels dashing the hoarfrost and snow with the dark leaves of evergreen like spray. "Always that a creature whom a breath might have withered," said the ghost. "But she had grown a large heart." "So she had," cried Scrooge. "You're right. I'll not gainsay it, spirit. God forbid." "She died a woman," said the ghost, "and had, as I think, children." "One child," Scrooge returned. "True," said the ghost. "Your nephew." Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, and answered briefly, "Yes, yes." Although they had but that moment left the school behind them, they were now busy thoroughfares of the city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed, where shadowy cars and coaches battled for the way, and all the strife and tumult of a real city were. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the slope shops that it too was Christmas time again, but it was 7 evening, and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. I know it, said Scrooge. Was I apprenticed here? They went in at the sight of the old gentleman in a Welsh wig sitting behind a high desk, that if he had been 2 inches taller must have knocked his head against the ceiling. Scrooge cried in great excitement, Why, it's old Fezwick! Bless his heart, it's Fezwick alive again. Old Fezwick laid down his pen and looked up at the clock which pointed to the hour of 7, rubbed his hands, adjusted his capricious waistcoat, laughed all over himself from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, Yo-ho, there, Ebenezer Dick! Scrooge's former self, now grown a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice. Dick Whitkins, to be sure, said Scrooge to the ghost. Bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Poor Dick, dear, dear. Oh, my boys, said Fezwick. No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let us have the shutters up, cried the old Fezwick, with a sharp clap of the hands, before a man can say Jack Robinson. You wouldn't believe how those two fellows went at it. They charged into the streets with the shutters, 1, 2, 3, had them up in their places, 4, 5, 6, barred them and pinned them, 7, 8, 9, and came back before you could have got the 12, panting like a racehorse. Hiddy-ho! Cried old Fezwick, skipping down from the high desk with wonderful agility. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Hiddy-ho, Dick! Cheer up, Ebenezer! Clear away, there was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away, with old Fezwick looking on. It was done in a minute. Every movable was packed off, as if it were dismissed from public life evermore. The floor was swept and watered, the lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright as a ballroom you would have desired to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book, and went up to the lofty desk, and made an orchestra of it, and tuned like 50 stomach aches, and came Mrs. Fezwick, one vast substantial smile. In came 3 Mrs. Fezwicks, beaming and lovable. In came 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In came the housemaid with her cousin the baker. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend the milkman. In came the boy from over the way, who was suspected of not having bought enough for his master, trying to hide himself behind the girl from next door, but one who was proved to have had her ears pulled by her mistress. In they all came one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. Away they all went, 20 couple at once, hand half, round at the back, and back again, the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round in various stages of affectionate grouping, old top couples always turning up in the wrong place, new top couples starting off again as soon as they got there, all the top couples at last, and not a bottom one to help them. When this result was brought about, old Fezwick, clapping his hands to stop the dance, cried out, Well done! And the fiddler plunged his hot face to a pot of a porter, especially provided for that purpose, but scorning the rest upon his reappearance. This began again, though there were no dances yet, as if the other fiddler had been carried home exhausted on a shutter, and he were a brandy man resolved to beat him out of sight or perish. There were more dances, and there were forfeits, there were more dances, and there was a cake, and there was negus. I don't know what negus is. And there was a great piece of cold roast, and there was a great piece of cold boiled, and there were mince pies and plenty of beer. But the great effect of the evening came after the roast and boiled, when the fiddler, an artful dog mind, the sort of man who knew his business better than you or I could have told him it, struck up Sir Roger de Coverley, Then old Fezwick stood out the dance with Mrs. Fezwick. Top couple too, were a good stiff piece of work cut out for them. 3 or 4 and 20 pair of partners, people who were not to be trifled with, people who would dance, had no notion of walking. But there had been twice as many, 4 times old Fezwick would have been a match for them, and so too would Mrs. Fezwick. As to her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. It's not high praise, tell me higher, and I'll use it. A positive light appeared the issue from Keswick's calves. They shone in every part of the dance like moons. You couldn't have predicted at any given time what would become of them next. And when old Fezwick and Mrs. Fezwick had gone through all the dances, advance and retire, holding hands with your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place. Fezwick cut so deftly that he appeared to wink with his legs, and came upon his feet without a stagger. I think they're talking about like a river dance. When the clock struck 11 and the domestic ball broke up, Mr. and Mrs. Fezwick took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. Everybody had retired but the 2 Prentices. They did the same to them, and thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene, within his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Dick were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost and became conscious that it was looking fully upon him, and the light upon his head burned very clear. A small matter, said the ghost, to make these silly folk so full of gratitude. Small, echoed Scrooge. The ghost sighed to him to listen to the 2 apprentices who were pouring out their hearts of prayers of old Fezwick. They had done so, said, What? Why, is it not? He had spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is that so much he deserves his praise? It isn't that, said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously like his former, and not like his last self. It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render happy or happy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or toil. We say that his power lies in the words and looks in things, so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite great, as if it cost a fortune. He felt the Spirit's glance and stopped. What's the matter? Asked the ghost. 1 second. Nothing particular, said Scrooge. Something, I think, the ghost insisted. No, said Scrooge. No, I should like to be able to say a word or 2 to my clerk just now, that's all. His former self turned down the lamps, and he gave an utterance to the wish. Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. My time grows short, said the Spirit, quick. This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect. For again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of his life. His face had not the harsh, rigid lines of later year, but had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eyes, which showed the passion that had taken root, and where the shadow of the grown tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat in the side of a fair young girl in a morning dress. In whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled with the light that shone out of the ghostly Christmas past. It matters little, she said softly, to you very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come, as I would have tried to, I have no just cause to grieve. What idol has replaced you? He rejoined. A golden one. This is an even-handed dealing of the world, he said. There is nothing on which is so hard as poverty. There is nothing which professes the condemnation of such sincerity as the pursuit of wealth. You fear the world too much, she answered gently. All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond a chance of its sort of reproach. I've seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion gain engrosses you. Have I not? What then? He retorted. Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I have not changed towards you. She shook her head. Am I? Am I? Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so, until a good season we could improve our worldly affairs by our patient industry. You are changed. When it was made, you were another man. I was a boy, he said impatiently. Your own feelings tell you that you were not what you are, she returned. I am that which promised happiness when we were one in heart. Is now, sorry, that which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly have I fought this, I would not say. It is enough that I have thought of it and can release you. Have I ever sought release? In other words, no, never. And what then? In this changed nature, it is an altered spirit in another atmosphere of life, another hope at its great end. In everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us, said the girl, looking mildly, but with steadiness upon him. Tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now? No. He seemed to yield to the justice of this supposition in spite of himself, but he had said with a struggle, You think not? I would gladly think otherwise if I could, she answered. Heaven knows. When I have learned the truth like this, I know how strong and irresistible it must be. But if you were free today, tomorrow, yesterday, even I believe that you would choose the tireless girl. You who, in your very confidence with her, weigh everything by gain, or choosing her if for a moment you were false enough to your own guiding principle to do so. Do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do, and I release you with full heart for the love of him who you once were. He was about to speak, but with her head turned from him, she resumed. You may, the memory of what is past, half makes me hope that you will have pain in this, a very, very brief time, and you will dismiss the recollection of it gladly, as an unprofitable dream, from which has happened well that you will work. May you be happy in the life you have chosen. She left him, and they parted. Spirit, said Scrooge, show me no more, conduct me home. Why do you delight in torturing me? One shadow more, exclaimed the ghost. No more, cried Scrooge, no more. I don't wish to see it. Show me no more. But the relentless ghost pinioned him in both his arms and forced him to observe what happened next. There was another scene in place, a room not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like the last that Scrooge believed it was the same until he saw her, now a comely matron, sitting opposite her daughter. The noise of this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge, in his agitated state of mind, could count. And not unlike the celebrated herd in the poem, there were not 40 children conducting themselves like one, but every child was conducting himself like 40. The consequences were barbarous beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. On the contrary, the mother and daughter laughed heartily, and enjoyed it very much, and the latter soon beginning to mingle in the sports, got pillaged by the young brigands most ruthlessly. What I would not have given to be one of them, though I never could have been so rude, no, no. I wouldn't for the wealth of all the world have crushed that braided hair and torn it down, and for the more precious little shoe I wouldn't have plucked it off, God bless my soul, to save my life. As to measuring her waist in sports as they did, bold young brood, I couldn't have done it. I should have expected my arms to have grown round it for a punishment, and never come straight again. And yet I should have dearly liked my own to have touched her lips, to have questioned her, and that she might have been opened them, to have looked upon the lashes of her downcast eyes and never raised a blush, to have let loose waves of hair an inch of which would have keepsake beyond price. In short, I would have liked it, I do confess, to have had the lightest license of a child, and yet been man enough to know its value. I wonder how long this story is. One second, Mark. I want to quickly look at something. Wait. Okay. Sorry about that, Mark. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she, with laughing face and plundered dress, now borne towards it, the centre of a flustered and boisterous group, just in time to greet the father, who came home attended by a young man laden with Christmas toys and presents. Then the shouting and the struggling, and the onslaught was made on the defenceless porter, the scaling him with chairs for ladders, to dive into his pockets and to spoil him with brown paper parcels, hold on tight by his cravat, hug him round the neck, pummel his back, and kick his legs in irreparable affection. The shouts of wonder and delight which had developed of every package was received. The terrible announcement that the baby had been taken in the act of putting the doll's frying pan into his mouth, and was more than suspect of having swallowed a fictitious turkey, food on a wooden platter, immense relief of finding this false alarm, joy and gratitude and ecstasy, though all indescribably alike. It is enough that by degrees the children and their emotions got out of the parlour, and by one stair at a time, up to the top of the house, where they went to bed and so subsided. Now Scrooge, looking more attentively than ever when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at his own fireside, when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and full of promise, might have called him father. And now, as springtime in the haggard winter of his life grew very dim indeed. Belle, said the husband, turning his wife with a smile, I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon. Who was it? Guess. How can I? Tut, I don't know. She added with the same breath, laughing as he laughed. Mr. Scrooge? Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed the eyes off his window, and saw he was not shut up. He had a candle inside. I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear. There he sat alone, quite alone in the world, I do believe. Spirit, said Scrooge in a low voice, remove me from this place. I told you these were shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. That they are what they are. Do not blame me. Remove me, Scrooge exclaimed. I cannot bear it. He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked looked at him with a face, in which some strange way there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it. Leave me, take me back, haunt me no longer. In the struggle, if that can be called a struggle, in which the ghost, with no visible resistance on his own part, was undisturbed by any effort of his adversary Scrooge, observed that its light was burning higher and bright, and dimly connecting that with its influence over him, had seized the extinguisher cap, and by a sudden action pressed it down on his head. The spirit dropped beneath it, so that the extinguisher covered its whole form, but though Scrooge pressed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light, which streamed out from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. He was conscious of being exhausted, and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further, being in his own bedroom, he gave the cap a biting squeeze, in which his hand relaxed, and barely had time to reel to his bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. That was Stave 2, the first of the spirits. We still have 3 more staves to go. This is the longest stave. It's 47 pages long. Stave 3, the second of the 3 spirits. Awakening in the middle of the prodigiously tough snore, and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness in the right nick of time, for the special purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. But finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains the new spectre would draw back, he put every one of them aside with his own hands, lying down again, established a sharp look all round the bed, for he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance. He did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. Gentlemen of the free and easy sort, who plume themselves of being acquainted with a move or two, and being usually equal to ninth time of day, express a wide range of their capacity for adventure by observing that they are good for anything from pitch to toss to manslaughter, between which opposite extremes no doubt there lies a tolerably wide and comprehensive range of subjects. Without venturing for Scrooge quite as heartily as this, I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for a good broad field of strange appearances, and that nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. Now, being prepared for almost everything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing, and consequently when the bell struck one and no ship appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. All this time he laid upon his bed, the very core and centre of a blaze of ruddy light, which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which being only light was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, for he was powerless to make out what it meant, or would be at, and was sometimes apprehensive that he might have been at the very moment an interesting case of spontaneous combustion, without having the consolation of knowing it. At last, however, he began to think, as you or I would have found first, was always a person not in a predicament who knew what ought to be done with it, would unquestionably have done it too at last. I say, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might have been the adjoining room, from whence on further tracing it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up and softly shuffled in his slippers to the door. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called out to him by his name and bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room, there was no doubt about that, but it had undergone surprise and transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked like a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. 1 second. Sorry, my mouth's getting a bit tired. The crisp leaves of holly and mistletoe and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney, as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or any man in many a winter season gone. Heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne, with turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long reefs of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12 cakes, and seething bowls of punch, that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon his couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch in the shape not unlike the Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed light on Scrooge, as he came peeping round the door. "Come in!" exclaimed the ghost. "Come in, and know me a better man." Scrooge entered timidly and hung his head before the spirit. He was not the dog Scrooge he had been. And though his eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them. "I am the ghost of Christmas present," said the spirit. "Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. He was clothed in one simple deep green robe or mantle, bordered on white fur. The garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capricious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of its garment, were also bare, and on its head wore no other covering than a holly wreath set hair. Here and there were shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free, as its gentle face. Its sparkling eyes, its open mind, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanour and joyful air, girded round its middle with an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and its ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. "You have never seen the likes of me before!" exclaimed the spirit. "Never," Scrooge made answer to it. "I have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my elder brothers, born of these later years," pursued the phantom. "I don't think I have," said Scrooge. "I'm afraid I have not. Have you had many brothers, Spirit?" "More than 1800, said the ghost. "A tremendous family to provide for," muttered Scrooge. The ghost of Christmas present rose. "Spirit," said Scrooge submissively, "conduct me where you will. I went forth last night in compulsion, and I learnt lessons which is working now. Tonight, if you ought to teach me, let me profit by it. Touch my robe." Scrooge did as he was told, and held it fast. Holly, mistletoe, red berries, ivy, turkey, geese, game, poultry, oh my god, raw meat, sausage, oysters, pies, puddings, fruit, and punch, all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of the night, where they stood in the city streets of Christmas morning, where, for the weather was severe, the people made rough, but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music, and scraped the snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings, and from the tops of the houses, whence it was mad delight to the boys to see coming thumping into the road and splitting into artificial little snowstorms. But the house fronts looked black enough, and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs, with the dirty oak snow upon the ground, which sat deposited and had been ploughed up in the deep furrows by the heavy wheels of carts and wagons. One second, I'm quickly this on a message. Anyways, sorry about that. Furrows were crossed and recrossed, and over 100 times the great streets branched off, and made more intricate design hard to trace. In the thick yellow mud and icy water, the sky was gloomy, and the shortest streets were choked up with the dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen, whose heavier particles descended in a shower of sootish atoms, as if all the chimneys of Great Britain had, by one consent, caught fire, and were blazing away to their dear hearts' content. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate of the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavoured to diffuse in vain. But the people who were shoveling away in the house were jovial and full of glee, calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball. Better-natured missiles far and many a worldly jest, laughing heartily if it went right, and not less heartily if it went wrong. And the poulterers' shops were half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory, and there were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts, shaped like the waistcoat of jolly old gentlemen, lolling at the door, tumbling out into the street, in their apoplectic opulence. There were ruddy brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions, shining from the fatness of their growths like Spanish friars, and winking from their shelves in wanton slyness at the girls as they went by, and glanced demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples, clustered high in the blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made in the shopkeeper's benevolence to dangle from the conspicuous hooks, that people's mouths might water, gratis as they passed. There were piles of philiberts, mossy and brown, recalling their fragrance, ancient walks among the woods, and pleasant shufflings ankle-deep in the withered leaves. There were Norfolk biffins, squab and swervy, setting off the yellow of oranges and lemons, and the great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating and beseeching to be carried home in paper bags, and eaten after dinner. delivering gold and silver fish set forth from these choices, fruit and bowls. Members of dull and stagnant blooded races appeared to know that there was something going on, and to the fish went gasping round and round their little world in slow and passionless excitement. The grocers, oh, the grocers, nearly closed, with perhaps 2 shutters down or 1, but through those gaps such glimpses. It was not alone that the scales ascending on the counter made a merry sound, or that twine and ruler parted the company so briskly, or that the canisters were rattled up and down like juggling tricks, or even that the blended scents of tea and coffee were so grateful to the nose, or even that the raisins were so plentiful and rare, the almonds so extremely white, the sticks of cinnamon so long and straight, the other spices so delicious, the candied fruits so caked and spotted with molten sugar, as to make the coldest lookers-on feel faint and subsequently bilious. Nor was it that the figs were more moist and pulpy, and that the French plums blushed in the modest tartness from their high decorated boxes, or that everything was good to eat in Christmas dress, for the customers were so hurried and so eager in the hopeful promise of the day, that they tumbled up against each other at the door, clashing their wicker baskets wildly, and left their purchases upon the counter, and came running back to fetch them, and committed hundreds of like mistakes in the best humour possible, while the grocer and his people were so frank and fresh that the polished hearts, with which they fastened their aprons behind them, might have been their own, worn outside for general inspection and for the Christmas dolls the peck at if they chose. But soon the steeples caught both good people all, to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes, with their gayest faces. At the same time there emerged from scores of by streets, lanes, and nameless turnings, interminable people carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revellers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for they stood with Scrooge beside him in the baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as their bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinner from his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch. Once or twice when there were angry words between some dinner carriers, who jostled with each other, shed a few drips of water on them from it, and their good humour was restored directly. For it is said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was. God love it, so it was. In the time the bells ceased and the bakers were shut, and yet there was still a genial shadowing forth of all these dinners and the progress of their cooking, and the fort botcher wet above each baker's oven, and their pavement smoked as if stones were cooking too. Is there a particular flavour in what you sprinkle from your torch? Asked Scrooge. There is, my own. Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day? Asked Scrooge. To any kindly green. To a poor one most. Why a poor one most? Asked Scrooge. Because it is needed most. Spirit, said Scrooge, after a moment's thought. I wonder you, of all beings in the many worlds about us, should desire to cramp these people with opportunities of innocent enjoyment. I, cried the Spirit. It would deprive them of their means of dining every 7th day, after the only day of which they can be said to dine at all, said Scrooge. Wouldn't you? I, cried the Spirit. You seek to close these places on the 7th day, said Scrooge. When it comes to the same thing. I seek, exclaimed the Spirit. Forgive me if I am wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least in that of your family, said Scrooge. There are some upon this earth of yours, returned the Spirit, who lay claim to know us, and who, in their deeds of passion, pride, ill-will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfishness in our names, who are as strange to us and all our kith and kin as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not us. Scrooge promised that he would, and they went on invisible, as they had been before, into the suburbs of the town. It was a remarkable quality of the ghost, which Scrooge had observed in the baker's, that notwithstanding his gigantic size, he could accommodate himself to any place with ease, and he would have stood beneath a low roof as gracefully, and like supernatural creatures as it was possible he could done in any lofty hall. And perhaps it was the pleasure this good spirit had shown off this kind of power, whereas his own kind, generous, hearty nature, and his sympathy with all poor men that led him straight to Scrooge's clerks. For there he went and took Scrooge with him, holding his robe, and on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. Think of that. Bob had but 15. Bob, a week himself. He pocketed on Saturday. But 15 copies of his Christian name. Gave the ghost a Christmas present, blessed his 4-roomed house. Then up rose Mrs. Cratchit, Cratchit's wife, dressed out, but poorly in twice-turned gown, but brave in ribbons, which are cheap and easy, like a goodly show for 6 pence. And she laid the cloth, assisted by Belinda Cratchit, second of her daughter, also brave in ribbons, while Master Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into the saucepan of potatoes, and getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar, Bob's private property conferred upon his son by an heir in honor of the day, into his mouth, rejoiced to find himself so gallantly attired, and yearned to show his linen in the fashionable parks. And now 2 smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside of the baker's they had smelled the goose, and known it for their own. And basking in the luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, these young Cratchits danced about the table, and exalted Mr. Peter Cratchit to the skies, while he, not proud, although his collars nearly choked him, blew to the fire until his slow potatoes bubbled up, knocking loudly at the saucepan lid, to be let out and peeled. What has ever got your precious father, then? Said Mrs. Cratchit, and your brother, Tiny Tim, and Martha. Want us later last Christmas Day by half an hour. Here's Martha, mother, said the girl, appearing as she spoke. Here's Martha, mother, cried the 2 young Cratchits. Hurrah! There's such a goose, Martha. Why, bless your heart alive, my dear. How late you are, Mrs. Cratchit said, kissing her 12 times, taking off her shorn bonnet with most officious zeal. We had a deal of work to finish up last night, replied the girl, and had to clear away for this morning, mother. Well, never mind so long as you are come, said Mrs. Cratchit. Sit ye down before the fire, my dear, and have a warm Lord bless you. No, no, there's father coming, cried the 2 young Cratchits, who were everywhere at once. Hide, Martha, hide. So mother hid herself, and came in little Bob, the father, with at least 3 feet of comforter exclusive from the fringe hanging down before him, and his threadbare clothes darned up and brushed to look seasonable, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Alas for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. Why, there's Aunt Martha, cried Bob Cratchit, looking round. Not coming, said Mrs. Cratchit. Not coming, said Bob, with a sudden declension in his high spirits, for it had been Tim's blood horse all day from the church and had come home rampant. Not coming on Christmas Day? Martha didn't like to see Egg disappointed, even if it were only a joke, so she came out prematurely behind a closed door, and ran to his arms while the 2 young Cratchits hustled Tiny Tim and bore him off to the washroom, that he might hear the pudding sing in the copper. And how did little Tim behave? Asked Mrs. Cratchit, when she rallied Bob to his credulity, and Bob hugged his daughter to his heart's content. Good as gold, said Bob, and better, somehow. He gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much, and thinks the strangest things you ever heard. He told me coming home that he hoped the people saw him in the church because he was a cripple. It might be pleasant to them to remember on Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. And Bob's voice was tremulous when he told him this, and he trembled more when he said that Tiny Tim was growing strong and hearty. His active little crush was heard on the floor, and back came Tiny Tim before another word was spoken, escorted by his brother and sister to his stool beside the fire, and while Bob turning up his cuffs as if, poor fellow, they were capable of being made more shabby, compounded some hot mixture with a jug and gin and lemons, and stirred it round and round, and put Bob the simmer. I really hope my dogs don't start barking while they're right next to me. Master Peter and his two ubiquitous young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, which soon returned in high procession. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought it a goose, the rarest thing of all birds, a feathered phenomenon, to which a black swan was a matter of course. Apparently black swans are actually in Australia. I know the saying, but like, I always thought that they were also in Europe and Australia, but no, they're solely an Australian animal, which is why I was so confused by it at one point. And in truth, it was something very like in the house. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed potatoes with incredible vigor. Miss Belinda sweetened up the apple sauce. Arthur dusted the hot plates. Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner of the house, at the table. The two young Cratchits set a chair for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their posts, crammed spoons into their mouth, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn to be helped. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, and Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving line, prepared to plunge into the breast. When she did, there came a long-expected gush of stuffing issue forth. One murmur of delight arose all around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat the table with the handle of his knife. If he cried, "Hurrah!" There was never such a goose, Bob said. He didn't believe there was ever such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavour and size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by apple sauce and mashed potatoes, it was sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying the small atom of a bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet every one had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrow. But now the plates were being changed by Miss Belinda. Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witness, to take up the pudding up and bring it in. Supposedly it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall in the backyard and stolen it, or they were married with their goose. A supposition at which the two young Cratchits came livid. All sort of horrors were supposed. Hallo, a great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like a washing day. That was a cloth. A smell like an Eden house and a pastry's cook next door to each other, with a laundress next to that. That was the pudding. In a half-minute, Mrs. Cratchit added, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing out in the quarter of the ignited brandy, and bedlight with Christmas holly stuck to the top. Oh my god. There's 150 at 94. I think we're about halfway. No, we're actually over halfway. But I do need to take a second so that my mouth will chill out. Because speaking all of this, I'm going to end up mumbling again. And I've done it before, and it sounds terrible, and I feel so bad about it because I didn't realize I was mumbling. And I was so upset. Oh, a wonderful pudding, Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he might be regarded as the great success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind. She would confess that she had her doubts about the quantity of the flour. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought that it was at all a small pudding for a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth was swept, and the fire made up. The compound and the drug being tasted and considered perfect, applied apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchits drew around the hearth, and what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half a one, and Bob Cratchit's elbow stood at the family display of light gathered Ring Apple stood in the family display of glass, 2 tumblers, and a curly custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff in the jug, however, as well as the golden goblets would have done. And Bob served it out with brimming looks while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and crackled noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us, all my dears. God bless us," and the family re-echoed. "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim, the last of all. He sat very close to his father's side upon the little stool. Bob held the withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child, and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. "Spirit," said Scrooge with an interest he had never felt, "tell me if Tiny Tim will live." "I see a vacant seat," said the ghost, "in a poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shutters remain unaltered by the future, the child will die." "No, no," said Scrooge. "Oh, no, kind spirit. Say he will be spared." "If these shutters remain unaltered by future, none other of my race," returned the ghost, "will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population." Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. "Man," said the ghost, "if man you be in your heart, not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until ye are discovered what the surplus is and where it is. We will decide what men live and what men shall die. It may be that in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor child. Oh God, I can hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on the too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust." Scrooge bent before the ghost's rebuke, and trembling cast his eyes to the ground, but he raised them speedily to his own name. "Mr. Scrooge," said Bob, "I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed!" cried Martha. "I wish I had him here. I'd give him peace of my mind to feast upon. I hope he'd have a good appetite for it." "My dear," said Bob, "the children, Christmas Day?" "It should be Christmas Day, I am sure," said she, "on which one drinks to the health of such odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows better than you poor fellow." "My dear," was Bob's mild answer, "Christmas Day." "I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's," said Mrs. Cratchit, "not for his. Long live to him. A merry and a Christmas and a happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt." The children drank the toast to her. It was the first in their proceeding which had no heartiness to it. Tim drank it last of all, but he didn't care 2 pence for it. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party. It was not dispelled by 4 or 5 minutes. "Damn!" One second. After it passed away, they were 10 minutes merrier than before. From the mere relief of Scrooge the baleful being done with, Bob Cratchit told them how he had a situation in his eye for the mouse Peter, which would bring in, if obtained, a full 5-6 pence weekly. Two young Cratchits laughed tremendously at the idea of Peter being a man of business, and Peter himself looked thoughtfully at the fire between his collars, as if he were deliberating on what particular investments he would show favour. He came to the receipt of the bewildering income. Martha, who was a poor apprentice at milliner's, then told them what kind of work she had to do and how many hours she worked at a stretch, and how she meant to lie in a bed tomorrow morning for a good long rest, tomorrow being a holiday she passed at home, and how she had been seen a countess and a lord some days before, how the lord was but as tall as was much about as tall as Peter, which Peter pulled his collar so high so you couldn't have seen him in his head, if he had been there. All the time the chestnuts and the jug went round and by had a song about a lost child traveling in the snow. Tiny Tim, who had a plaintive little voice, sang it very well indeed. There was nothing of a high mark in this. They were not a handsome family, they were not all well dressed, their shoes were far from being waterproof, their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very much likely did, the inside of a pawnbroker's. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And when they had faded, they looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the spirit's torch at parting. Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially turned to him until the last. By this time it was getting dark and snowing pretty heavily, and as Scrooge and the spirit went along the streets in the brightness of the roaring fires and parlours, and all sorts of rooms, here the flickering of the blaze showed preparations for a cosy dinner, with hot plates through and through before the fire, and deep red curtains ready to be drawn to be shut out cold and darkness. There all the children of the home were running into the snow to meet their married sisters, brothers, cousins, uncles, aunts, and be the first to greet them. Here again were shadows on the window blinds of guests assembling. There was a group of handsome girls, all hooded and fur-booted, and all chatting at once, tripped lightly to some near neighbour's house. And where were upon the single man who saw them enter artful witches. Well they knew it, in a glow. But if you judge from the number of people on their way to friendly gatherings, you might have thought that no one was at home to give them welcome when they got there. Instead, every house expecting company, and piling upon its fires half chimney high. Venison upon it, how the ghost exulted, how it bared its breadth of breast, and opened its capricious palm, and floated upon the outpouring with a generous hand its bright and harmless mirth, on everything within its reach. The very lamplighter who ran on before, dotting the sky, shrieked of specks of light, and who dressed splendid who dressed to spend the evening somewhere, laughed out loudly as the spirit passed, though the little Kern, the lamplighter, that he had any company but Christmas. And now without a word of warning from the ghost, they stood upon the bleak and desert moor, where monstrous masses of root stone were cast about, as though they were a burial place of giants. Why do I have an app? Okay, I don't know. So people keep like messaging me, and I'm trying to make sure I don't miss anything time important, because it's Christmas, and I said I would be there if anyone invited me to something. Down the west, setting sun had left a streak of fiery red, and glared upon the desolation for an instant like a solemn eye, running lower and lower yet, was lost in the thick gloom of the darkest night. What is this? What is this place? Asked Scrooge. A place where miners live, who labour in the bowels of the earth, returned the spirit. What they know me, see? A light shone in the window of a hut, and swiftly they advanced towards it. Passing through the wall of mud and stone, they found the cheerful company assembled around a glowing fire, an old man and woman with their children and their children's children, and another generation beyond that. They all decked out gaily in their holiday attire. The old man in the voices seldom rose above the howling of the wind, and from the barren waste was singing them a Christmas song. They had a very old song when he was a boy, and from time to time they all joined in the chorus. So shortly as they raised their voices, the old man got quite blithe and loud, and so shortly as they stopped, his vigor shrank again. The spirit did not tarry here, but bade Scrooge fold his robe, and passed above the moor, and sped whither, not to see, to see. Scrooge's horror, looking back, he saw the last of lands, a frightful range of rocks behind him, and his ears were deafened by the thundering of water, as it rolled and roared and raged among the dreadful caverns which it had worn, and fiercely tried to undermine the earth. Built upon a dismal reef of sunken rocks some league or so from the shore, on which the waters chaffed and dashed, and the wild year through there stood a solitary lighthouse. Great heaps of seaweed clung to its base, and storm birds born of the wind, one might suppose, as seaweed of the water, rose and fell about it. Like waves they skimmed. But even here 2 men who watched the light had made a fire, and that through the loophole in the thick stone wall, shut out the bright rays of the awful sea. Drawing their horny hands over the rough table which they sat, they wished each other a Merry Christmas in their kind of grog, and one of them, the elder two, his face all damaged and scarred with hard weather, and a figurehead of an old ship might be, struck up a sturdy song that was like a gale in itself. Again the ghost sped on above the black heaving sea, on and on, until, being far away as he told Scrooge from the shore, any shore, they lighted upon a ship, where they stood beside a helmsman at the wheel, and looked out at the bow. The officer who had the watch, dark ghostly figures in their several stations, but every man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke below his breath to their companion of some bygone Christmas day, with homeward hopes belonging to it. And every man on board, waking or sleeping, good or bad, had a kinder word for another on that day than any day of the year. And they shared some extent of the festivities, and had remembered those he cared for at a distance, and had known that they were delighted to remember him. It was a great surprise to Scrooge while listening to the moaning of the wind, and thinking what a solemn thing it was to move on through the lonely darkness of an unknown abyss, whose depths were secret as profound as death. It was a great surprise as Scrooge thus engaged to hear the hearty laugh. It was a much greater surprise to Scrooge to recognize it as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room with the spirit, smiling brightly at his side, and looking at the same nephew with approving affability. "Ha!" laughed Scrooge's nephew. "Ha! If you should happen by any unlucky chance to know a man more blessed in life than Scrooge's nephew, all I can say is I should like to know him too. Introduce him to me, and I'll cultivate his acquaintance. It is a fair, even-handed, noble adjustment of things that while there is an infection and disease and sorrow, there is nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humour." When Scrooge's nephew laughed in this way, hollowing his sides, rolling his head, and twisting his face in the most extravagant contortions, Scrooge's nephew by marriage laughs as heartily as he and their assembly of friends, being not quite a bit behandled, roared out lustfully. "He said that Christmas was a humbug, as I live," cried Scrooge's nephew. "He believes it too." "What a shame for him, Fred," said Scrooge's niece indignantly. "Bless those women. They never do anything by halves. They are always in earnest." She was very pretty, exceedingly pretty, with a dimpled, surprised look and capital face, a ripe little mouth that seemed to be made to be kissed, as no doubt it was, all kinds of girls with good little dots about her chin, that melted into one another when she laughed, and the sunniest pairs of eyes they ever saw. In any little creature's head, altogether she was what you would have thought provoking, but satisfactory too, oh, perfectly satisfactory. "He is a comical old fellow," said Scrooge's nephew. "That's the truth. Not so pleasant as he might be. However, his offences carry their own punishment, and I have nothing to say against him." "Oh, I'm sure he is very rich, Fred," said Scrooge's niece. "At least you always tell me so." "And what of that, my dear?" said Scrooge's nephew. "His wealth is of no use to him. He didn't do any good with it. He didn't make himself comfortable with it. He hasn't the satisfaction of thinking that he's ever going to benefit us with it." "I have patience with him," observed Scrooge's niece. Scrooge's niece's sisters and all the other ladies expressed the same opinion. "Oh, I have," said Scrooge's nephew. "I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who suffers all by his ill whims? Himself always. He takes it into his head to dislike us, and he won't come and dine with us. What's the consequences? He doesn't lose much of a dinner." "Indeed, I think he loses a very good dinner," interrupted Scrooge's niece. Everybody else said the same, and they must be allowed to have been competent judges, because they had just dinner. And with the dessert upon the table, they were clustered around the fire by lamplight. "Well, I'm very glad to hear it," said Scrooge's nephew, "because I haven't any great faith in these young housekeepers. What do you say, Topper?" Topper had clearly got his eye upon one of Scrooge's niece's sisters, who had answered that a bachelor was a wretched outcast, who had no right to express an opinion on the subject. Whereas Scrooge's sister, the plump one with the lace tucker, did not the one with roses, blushed. "Oh, go on, Fred. Do go on, Fred," said Scrooge's niece, clapping her hands. "He never finishes what he begins to say. He is such a ridiculous fellow." Scrooge's nephew revelled in another laugh, as it was impossible to keep the infection off. But the plump sister tried hard to do it with aromatic vinegar. His example was unanimously followed. "What I was going to say," said Scrooge's nephew, "is that as the consequence of his taking dislike to us, and not making merry with us, is, as I think, he loses some pleasant moments. Which could do him no harm. I am sure he loses pleasanter companions than he can find in his own thoughts, either in his mouldy old office, or his dusty chambers. I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, for I pity him. He may rail at Christmas till he dies, but he can't help thinking better of it. I defy him if he finds me going there in such good temper, year after year, and saying, 'Uncle Scrooge, how are you?' If it only puts him in the vein to leave his poor clerk £50, that's something. And I think I shook him yesterday." It was their turn to laugh now at the notion of the shaken Scrooge, but being thoroughly good-natured and not much caring for what they laughed at, they laughed at any rate. He encouraged them in their merriment, and passed the ball joyously. After tea they had some music, for they were a musical family, and knew what they were about when they sung a glee or catch. I can assure you, especially Topper, who could growl away in the bass like a good one. I don't know what the fuck that means. And never swell the large veins in his forehead, or get red in the face over it. Scrooge's niece played well upon the harp, and played among other tunes a simple little air. A mere nothing, you might have learned to whistle it in the 2 minutes, which had been familiar to the child who fetched Scrooge from the boarding school, as he had been reminded of the ghost of Christmas Past. When his strain of music sounded, all the things the ghost had shown him came upon his mind. He softened more and more, and thought that if he could have listened to it often, years ago, he might have cultivated some kindness of life for his own happiness, his own hands, without resorting to the sexton's spade that buried Jacob Marley. But they didn't devote the whole evening to music. While after they played that forfeits, for it is good to be children sometime, and never better than at Christmas, when its mighty founder was a child itself. Stop, for there was a game at Byman's Bluff. Of course there was. And I no more believe Topper was really blind than I believe he had eyes in his boots. My opinion is that it was a done thing between him and Scrooge's nephew, that the ghost of Christmas present knew it. The way he went after that plump sister in the lace tucker was an outrage on the credulity of human nature. Knocking down the fire irons, tumbling over the chair, and bumping up against the piano, smothering himself among the curtains wherever she went. There he went, there went he. He always knew where the plump sister was. He wouldn't catch anybody else. If he had fallen up against them, as some of them did, and stood there, he would have made a feint of endeavouring to seize you. Would have been an affront to your understanding. It would have instantly have sidled off. My brain's farting. Would have instantly sidled off in the direction of the plump sister. She often cried that it wasn't fair, and it really was not. When at last he caught her, when in spite of her silken rustles and her rapid fluttering past him, she got into her corner, whence there was no escape, and his conduct was in the most inexplicable. He was pretending not to know her, he was pretending that it was necessary to touch her head-dress, and further assure himself of her identity by pressing a certain ring on his finger, and a certain chain about his neck, was a vile monstrous. No doubt she told him her opinion of it, when another blind man being in office, they were so very confidential together behind the curtains. Scrooge's niece was not one of the blind man's buff party, but made comfortable with a large chair and a footstool in a snug corner, where the ghost and Scrooge were close behind her, while she joined the forfeits, and loved her love to admiration, of all the letters of the alphabet. Likewise, at the game of how, when, and where, she was very great, and so the secret joy of Scrooge's nephew beat her sisters hollow. And although there were sharp girls too, as Topper could have told you, there might have been 20 people there, young and old, but they all played, and so did Scrooge, for wholly forgetting in the interest he had he had in what was going on, that it was the voice made no sound in their ears. He sometimes came out with his guests quite loud, and very often guessed right too, for the sharpest needle best Whitechapel arranged not to cut the in the eye, was not sharper than Scrooge, fond as he took it in his head to be. And the ghost was greatly pleased to find him in his mood, and looked upon him with such favour that he might beg like a boy to be allowed to stay until the guests departed. But this spirit said could not be done. Here's a new game, said Scrooge. 1 half-hour spirit, only one. It was a game called Yes or No, where Scrooge's nephew had to think of something, and the rest must find out what. He only answered their questions with yes or no, as the case was. The brisk fire of questioning to which he expounded elicited from him that he was thinking of an animal, a live animal, rather a disagreeable animal, a savage animal, and an animal that growled and grunted sometimes, and talked sometimes, and lived in London, and walked about the street, and wasn't made a show of, and wasn't led by anybody, and didn't live in a menagerie, and never killed in the market, and was not a horse or an ass or a cow or a bull or a tiger or a dog or a pig or a cat or a bear. At every fresh question was put to him, his nephew burst into a fresh roar of laughter, and so inexpressibly tickled that he was obliged to get up off his sofa and stamp. At last the plump sister, falling into a similar state, cried out, I have found it. I know what it is, Fred, I know what it is. And what is it? Cried Fred. It's your Uncle Scrooge. Which it certainly was. Admiration was the universal sentiment, and some objected that reply. Is it a bear? It ought to have been. Yes, and as much as an answer in the negative was sufficient, they diverted their thoughts from Mr. Scrooge. Those they ever had any tendency to do that. He has given us plenty of merriment, I am sure, said Fred. It would be ungrateful not to drink to his health. Here, have a glass of mulled wine. And I say, Uncle Scrooge. Well, Uncle Scrooge, they cried. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man wherever he is. Whatever he is, said Scrooge's nephew. Oh, a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, whatever he is, said Scrooge's nephew. He wouldn't take it from me, but he may have it nonetheless, Uncle Scrooge. Uncle Scrooge had impressively become so gay and light-hearted that he would have pledged unconscious company in return, and thanked them with such a mandible speech, if the ghost had given him time. The whole seemed passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew, and he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many homes they visited, but always with a happy end. The spirit stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign lands they were close at home. By struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope. By poverty, and it was rich. In almshouses, hospital, in jail, in misery's every refuge, where the vain man in his little brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit out. He left his blessing and told Scrooge his precepts. It was a long night, if it were only a night, but Scrooge had his doubts on this, because Christmas holidays appeared to be condemned into the space of time they were past. It is strange, too, that while Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge observed this change, but never spoke of it until they were at the children's 12th night party, where, looking at the spirit as they stood together in the open place, he noticed that its hair was grey. Are spirits' lives so short? asked Scrooge. My life upon this globe is very brief, replied the ghost. It ends tonight. Tonight, cried Scrooge. Tonight at midnight. Hark! The time is drawing near. The chimes were ringing 11:15 at that moment. Forgive me if I am not justified in what I ask, said Scrooge, looking more intently at the spirit's robe. But I see something strange, not belonging to yourself, protruding from your skirt. Is it a foot or a claw? It might be a claw, for flesh there is upon it, said Spirit Sorrowful reply. Look here. From the foldings of robe it brought two children, wretched objects, frightful, hideous, and miserable. They knelt down at its feet and clung at the outside of its garment. Oh man, look here, look down here, exclaimed the ghost. They were boy and girl, yellow and meager, ragged, scowling wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility. Where graceful youth should have healed their features and touched them with its freshest tints, a seal-shawled hand like that of age, and pine shed and pine head and twisted them, and pulled them into shreds, where angels might have sat and thrown devils low, and glared out menacingly. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade, for all the mysteries of wonderful creation, as the monster's half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back, appalled. Having shown them to him, he tried to say that they were fine children, but the words choked them. Rather than the parties to a lie of such enormous magnitude. Spirit, are they yours? Scrooge said so meekly. They are mine, said the spirit, looking down upon them, and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both, and all their degree. But most of all, beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it, cried the spirit, stretching out his hand towards the city. Slanders those who tell it to ye. Admit for your own facetious purpose, and make it worse, and abide that by the end. They have no refuge or resource, cried Scrooge. Are there no prisons? Asked the spirit, turning on him for the last time with his own words. Are there no workhouses? The bell struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. When the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of Jacob Marley. Lifting his eyes, he beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming like a mist to the ground towards him. We did it, Chad, we win. That was stave 3, and now we're going on to stave 4, the last of the spirits. The phantom slowly and gravely silently approached. When it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for the very air through which the spirit moved seemed to travel, scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this it would have been difficult to detach its fingers from the night, and separate from the darkness which lay in its surrounding. He felt that it was tall and stately where it came beside him, and its mysterious presence filled with solemn dread. He knew no more, for the spirit neither spoke nor moved. Am I in the presence of the ghost of spirit? Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come? My apologies. The spirit answered not, but pointed downward with its hand. You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before us, Scrooge pursued. Is that so, spirit? The upper portion of the garments was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. Although well used to the ghastly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, that he found that he could hardly stand when prepared to follow it. The spirit paused a moment, as observing his condition, and giving him time to recover. But Scrooge was all the worse for this. It filled him with a vague and certain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon him, while he, though he stretched his own utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand on one great heap of black. Ghost of the future, he exclaimed, I fear you more than any spectre I've seen before. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear your company, and do it with a thankful heart. Will you now speak to me? He gave him no reply. The hand pointed straight before them. Lead on, said Scrooge, lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit. The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed the shadow of its dress, which bore him up. He fought and carried him along. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city seemed rather spring about them, and encompassed them of its own act. But there they were, in the heart of it, on change amongst the merchants who buried up and down and chinked on the money in their pockets and conversed in groups, and looked at their watches and trifled thoughtfully with their great gold seals, and so forth as Scrooge had seen them often. The stairs stopped beside a little knot of businessmen, observing that the hand was pointed to them. Scrooge advanced and listened to their talk. No, said the great fat man with Munch's chin. I don't know much about it. Either way, I only know he's dead. When did he die? And inquired another. Last night, I believe. Why, what was the matter with him? Asked the third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff box. I thought he would never die. God knows, said the first with a yawn. What good has he done with money? Asked the red-faced showman with a pendulous excrescence on the end of his nose that shook the guard of his turkey cock. I haven't heard, said the man with a large chin, yawning. Left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know. This pleasantry was received with a general laugh. It's likely to be a very cheap funeral, said the same speaker, for upon my life I don't know anybody go to it. I suppose we make up a party and volunteer. I don't mind going if lunch is provided, observed another gentleman, but I must be fed if I make one. Another laugh. Well, I am the most disinterested among you, after all, said the first speaker, for I never wear black gloves and I never eat lunch, but I'll offer to go if anybody else will. When I come to think of it, I'm not sure if I wasn't his most particular friend. We used to stop and speak whenever we met. Bye-bye. The speakers listened, strode away, and mixed with other groups. Scrooge knew the men, and looked towards the spirit for an explanation. The phantom glided into the street, its finger pointed to two persons meeting. Scrooge listened again, thinking, and that the explanation might lie here. He knew these men also, perfectly. They were men of business, very wealthy and of great importance. They made a point of always standing well in their esteem in a business point of view, and that is strictly in a business point of view. How are you? Said one. How are you? Returned the other. Well, said the first, old Scratch has got his own at last, has he? Eh? So I am told, returned the second. Cold, isn't it? Seasonable for Christmas time. You're not a skater, I suppose? No, no, something else to think of. Good morning. Not another word, that was their meeting, their conversation, and their parting. Scrooge was at first inclined to surprise that the spirit would attach importance to conversation apparently so trivial, but feeling sure that they must have some hidden purpose, he set himself to consider what is likely to be. They could scarcely be supposed to have had bearing on the death of Jacob, his old partner, for that was past, and the ghost province was the future. Nor could he think of any other immediately connected with himself who could apply to them, but nothing down that whomever they applied to had some latent moral for his own improvement, that he resolved to treasure up every word he heard, and everything he saw, especially observe the shadow of himself when it appeared, with an expectation that his conduct of his future self would give him what he missed, and would render the solution to these riddles easy. He looked about that very place for his own image, but another man stood in the accustomed corner, and although the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes poured through the porch. It gave him little surprise, however, for he had been resolved in his mind the change of life. Therefore he hoped he saw his newborn resolution carried out in this. Quiet and dark beside him, the phantom stood with an outstretched hand, and aroused himself from his thought and questioned. He fancied from the turn of his head in that situation of reference that the unseen eyes were looking at him keenly, made him shudder and feel very cold. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of town where Scrooge had never penetrated before. although he recognized the situation and its bad repute. The ways were foul and narrow. The shops and houses are wretched. The people half naked, drunken, and slipshod ugly. Alleys and archways were like so many cesspools, disgorged from their offences of smell and dirt and life upon the struggling streets. And the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth, and with misery. Far into this den of infamous resort there was a low-browed, beetling shop, where below a pent roof where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. Upon the floors within there were piled up heaps of rusty keys, nails, chains, hinges, valves, scales, weights, and refused iron of all kinds. Secrets that few would like to scrutinize were bred and hidden in mountains of unseemly rags, masses of corrupted fat, and sepulchres of bones. Sitting among the wares he dealt in, by a charcoal stove made of old bricks, was a grey-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age, who had screened himself for the cold air without by a frowsy curtain of miscellaneous tatters, hung upon the lion, and smoked his pipe for all the luxury of calm retirement. Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, just as a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop. But she had scarcely entered when another woman, similarly laden, came in too, and she was closely followed by a man in faded black, who was no less startled by the sight of them than they had been in the recognition of each other. After a short period of blank astonishment, in which the old man with the pipe had joined them, they had all burst into laughter. "Let the old charwoman alone be the first," cried she. "Oh, let the old charwoman alone be the first." So she entered first. "Let the laundress come alone to be second. Let the undertaker's man come alone to be the third. Look there, old Joe, here's a chance. If we haven't all three met here without meaning it." "You couldn't have met in a better place," said old Joe, removing his pipe from his mouth. "Come to the parlour. You were made freer of it long ago, you know. And the other two aren't strangers. Stop till I shut the door of the shop. Ah, how it squeaks. There's not much of a rusty bit of metal in the place of its own hinges, I believe, and I'm sure there's no such bones as here's mine. Ha! All suitable to calling out our calling. They're all well matched. Come into the parlour, come into the parlour." The parlour was the space behind the screen of rags. The old man rang the fire together with the old stair rod, and gave trim to his smoky lamp, for it was night, and the stems of his pipe was put into his mouth. While he did, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle on the floor, and had sat down in a flaunting manner on a stool, crossing her elbows on her knees with a bold look of defiance the other two. "What odds, then? What odds, Mrs. Dilber?" said the woman. "Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did." "That's true," said the laundress. "No man more so." "Why don't we stand out staring as if you were afraid, woman? Who's the wiser? We're not going to pick holes in each other's coats, I suppose." "No, indeed," said Mrs. Dilber and the man together. "We should hope not." "Very well, then," cried the woman. "That's enough. Those who are the worse for the loss of a few things like these. Not dead men, I suppose." "No, indeed," said Mrs. Dilber, laughing. "We wanted to keep them after he was dead. A wicked old screw," pursued the woman. "Why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he would have had something to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last there, alone by himself. It's the truest word that was ever spoken, Mrs. Dilber. It's a judgment upon him." "I wish it was a little heavier one," replied the woman. "It should have been. You may depend upon it. If I could have laid out my hand on anything else. Open up that bundle, old Joe. Let me know if there's anything of value in it. Speak out plain. I'm not afraid to be the first, nor afraid for them to see it. We knew pretty well that we were helping ourselves before we met here, I believe. There's no sin. Open up the bundle, Joe." But the gallantry of their friends would not allow for this, and the man in faded black, mounting the breach first, produced his plunder. It was not expensive, a seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value were all. These were severely examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked up the sums he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and added them to the total when he found that there was nothing more to come. That's your account, said old Joe, and I wouldn't give another 6 pence. But if I were to be boiled for not doing it. Who was next? Mrs. Gilbert was next. Sheets and towels, a little wear apparel, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. I always give too much later. It's a weakness of mine. That's the way I ruin myself, said old Joe. That's your account. If you ask for another penny and made it an open question, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock it off 1/2 crown. And now undo my bundle, old Joe, said the first woman. Joe went down to his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large heavy roll of some dark stuff. What do you call this? Said Joe. Bed curtains? Ah, the woman turned, laughing and leaning forward on her crossed arms. Bed curtains. You don't mean to say you took them down, rings and all, with him lying there, said Joe. Yes, I do, replied the woman. Why not? You were born to make your fortune, said Joe, and you suddenly do it. I certainly don't hold my hand. I certainly shan't hold my hand when I can get anything in it by reaching out. For the sake of such a man he was, I promise you, Joe, returned the woman coldly. Don't drop that oil upon the blankets now. His blankets? Asked Joe. Whose else do you think's? Replied the woman. He isn't likely to take the cold without them, I dare say. I hope he didn't die of anything catching, eh? Old Joe stopped in his work, looking up. Don't you be afraid of that, returned the woman. I am so fond of his company that I'd loiter about him for such a thing if I did. Huh. You may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it or any threadbare place. It's the best he had, and a fine one too. That I've wasted it if it had been for me. What do you call wasting it on him? Asked Joe. Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure, replied the woman with a laugh. Somebody was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. If calico ain't good enough for such a purpose, it isn't good enough for anything. It's quite becoming to the body. He can't look uglier than he did in that one. Scrooge listened to the dialogue in horror as he sat and grouped about this spoil in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp. He viewed with detestation and disgust. What could hardly have been greater, though there had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself? After one, when the old Joe produced a flannel bag with money in it, sorted out the several gains of the ground. This is the end of it, you see. This is the end of it, you see. He frightened away everyone. I don't actually. No, it's a woman. This is the end of it, you see. He frightened away everyone from him when he was alive, to profit when he was dead. Spirit? Asked Scrooge, shuddering from head to foot. I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this? We were caused in terror for the scene had changed. Now he almost touched a bed, a bare, uncurtained bed. Much beneath a ragged sheet there lay something covered up, by which it was done announced itself in awful language. The room was very dark, too dark to be observed any accuracy. Though Scrooge glanced about it in obedience to the secret impulse, anxious to know what kind of room it was, a pale light rising out of the air fell straight upon the bed, and on it, plundered and bereft, unwashed and unwept, uncared for, was the body of this man. Scrooge glanced towards the phantom. Its steady head was pointing to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted, the slightest reason of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. And he thought of it, felt how easy it would be to do, and longed to do it. He had no more power to withdraw the veil than to dismiss the spectre at his side. O cold, cold, rigid, dreadful death, act upon thine altar here, and dress it with such terrors as thou hast thy command. For this is thy domain. But of the loud revered and honoured head, thou canst not turn one hair to thy dread purpose, make one feature odious. It is not that the hand is heavy and will fall down when released. It is not that the heart will pulse and the pulse is still, but that the hand was open, generous and true, the heart brave, warm and tender, and the man's pulse. Strike, shadow, strike, and see his good deeds springing from the wound, to sow the world with life immortal. No voice pronounced these words in Scrooge's ears, and yet he heard them when he looked down upon the bed. He thought if this man could be raised up now, what would be his foremost fault? Avarice, hard dealings, regret, and cares. They had brought him to a rich end, truly. He lay in a dark, empty house, with not a man, a woman, or child to say he was kind to me in this or that, and for that man to be one or for the memory of one kind word. I would be kind to him. A cat was tearing at the door, and there was a sound of gnawing rats beneath the hearthstone. What they wanted in the room of death, and why they were so restless at the skirt, Scrooge did not dare to think. Spirit, he said, this is a fearful place in leaving it. I shall not leave its lessons, trust me. Let us go. Still the ghost pointed an unmoved finger at the head. I understand you, Scrooge returned, and I would do it if I could, but I have not the power, Spirit, I have not the power. Ken seemed to look upon him. If there is any present in this town who feels emotion caused by this man's death, said Scrooge, quite agonized, show this person to me, Spirit, I beseech you. The phantom spread its dark robe before him for a moment, like the wing, and withdrawing it revealed a room by daylight where a mother and her children were. She was expecting someone, and with anxious eagerness, for she walked up and down the room, started at every sound, looked out from the window, glanced at the clock, tried up in bed to work with her needle, and could hardly bear the voice of the children and their play. 1 second. Okay, this is unrelated. Sorry. At length, long expected knock was heard. She hurriedly rushed to the door to meet her husband. Nancy's face was careworn and depressed, though he was young. There was a remarkable expression in it now, a kind of serious delight of which he felt ashamed, which he struggled to repress. He sat down at the dinner that had been holding for him by the fire, and they asked him faintly, "What news?" Which was not until after a long silence he appeared embarrassed to answer. Is it good or bad? Is it good or bad? She said. Is it good, she said, or bad, to help him? Bad, he answered. Are we quite ruined? No. There's hope yet, Caroline. If he relents, she said, amazed. There is. Nothing is past hope. Such a miracle happened. He is past relenting, said her husband. He is dead. She was a mild and patient creature, if her face spoke truth. She was thankful in her soul to hear it, and so she said so with clasped hands. She prayed forgiveness for the next moment and was sorry, but for the first was the emotion of her heart. What half-drunken, what the half-drunken woman, who the fuck, who is speaking in this section? I don't know. What the half-drunken woman whom I told you of last night said to me, when I tried to see him and obtain a week's delay, and what I heard from was a mere excuse to avoid me, was that to have been quite true. He was not only very ill, but dying then. To whom will our debt be transferred? I don't know. But before that time we shall be ready with the money, and even though we were not, it would be bad fortune indeed to find a merciless creditor as in his successor. May sleep tonight with hearts, Caroline. Yes, soften it as they would, their hearts were lighter. The children's faces, the husband, and clustered around to hear that they so little understand were brighter. It was a happy house with this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him, caused by the event, was one of pleasure. Let me see some tenderness connected with her death, said Scrooge. For that dark chamber spirit, His real life just now will be forever present to me. The ghost conducted with several streets familiar to his feet. As they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was to be seen. He entered poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling which he had visited before, and found the mother and children seated around the fire, quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were still as statues in one corner. The son looked up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and daughters engaged in sewing, but surely they were quite quick. And he took a child. Wait, who's the fuck's reading? And he took a child. Took a child and set him in the midst of them. When Scrooge heard those words before, he had not dreamed it. The boy must have read them out. As he and the spirit crossed the threshold, why did he not go on? The mother laid her work on the table and put her hands to her face. The colours hurt my eye, she said. The colour? Ah, poor Tiny Tim. They're better now again, said Cratchit's wife. It makes them weak by candlelight, and I wouldn't show their weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near this time. Pass it, rather, Peter answered, shutting his book. I think he's walked a little slower than he used to. These last few evenings, mother. They were quiet again, and at last she said in a steady, cheerful voice, only faltered once. I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon thy shoulder, very fast indeed. And so have I, cried Peter, often. And so have I, claimed another. So had all. But he was very light to carry, she resumed, intent on her work, and his father loved him so, that it was no trouble, and there is your father at the door. She hurried to meet him, and little Bob in his comforter. He had need of it, poor fellow, came in. His tea was ready for him in the hob, and they all tried to should help to it most. And two young Cratchits got up to his knees and laid each child a little cheek against his face. And they said, Don't mind it, father, don't grieve. Bob was very cheerful with them and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work on the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said. Sunday? You went today then, Robert? Said the wife. Yes, my dear, returned Bob. I wished I could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green the place is. But you see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on Sunday, my little child, cried Bob. My little child. He broke down all at once. He could not help it. If he could have helped it, he would, and his child would have been farther apart, perhaps, than they were. He left the room and went upstairs to the room above, which lighted cheerfully, and hung with Christmas. And there he was at a chair set close beside the child, and there were signs of someone having been there lately. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he had paused a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face. He was reconciled with what had happened, and went down again quite happy. They drew about the fire and talked, the girls and the mother working still. Bob told them the extraordinary kindness of Mrs. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had scarcely seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day, and so they looked just a little down, you know, said Bob, inquired what had happened to distress him, on which Bob said, For he is a pleasant-spoken gentleman you ever heard. I told him. I am heartily sorry for Mr. Cratchit. I'm heartily sorry for Mr. Cratchit, and heartily sorry for your good wife. By the by, how he ever knew that I don't know. Knew what, my dear? Why, that you were a good wife. Everybody knows that, said Peter. Very well observed, my boy, cried Bob. I hope they do. Hardly sorry, he said, for your good wife. For if I can be of service to you in any way, he said, give me his card. This is where I live. Pray come to me. That wasn't, cried Bob, for the sake of anything that he might have been able to do for us. Much for it, as for his kind way, that this was quite delightful. Very seemed as if he had known our Tiny Tim, and felt with us. I'm sure he's a good soul, said Mrs. Cratchit. You'd be sure of it, my dear, returned Bob. If you saw and spoke to him, I shouldn't be at all surprised. Oh, I say we got Peter a better situation. Oh, only hear that, Peter. And then, cried the girls, Peter will be keeping company with someone. It's enough for himself. Get along with you, retorted Peter, grinning. It's just as likely as not, said Peter. One of these days, though there's plenty of time for that, my dear. But however and wherever we part from one another, I am sure we shall get poor Tiny Tim, shall we? Or this first parting that were amongst us. Never, father, cried they all. And I know, said Bob, I know, my dears, that when we recollect how patient, how mild he was, although he was a little child, we should not quarrel easily amongst ourselves and forget poor Tiny Tim in doing so. No, never, father, they cried, and I am very happy. One moment, I'm going to go check something. Okay. Mrs. Cratchit kissed him, and his daughters kissed him. The two young Cratchits kissed him, and Peter and himself shook hands. The spirit of Tiny Tim, thy childish essence, was from God. Spectre, said Scrooge, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me, what man was whom we saw lying in bed? The ghost of Christmas yet to come conveyed him, as before, though at a different time, he thought. Indeed, there seemed to be no order in these later visions, save that they were in the future, into the resorts of business men, but showed not himself. Indeed, the spirit did not stay for anything, went straight on as to the end just now desired, until they brought Scrooge to tarry for a moment. This court, said Scrooge, through which we hurry now, is where my place of occupation is, and has been for a length of time. Eschew the house, let me behold what I shall be in days to come. The spirit stopped, the hand pointed elsewhere. The house is yonder, Scrooge exclaimed. Why do you point away? The inexorable finger underwent no change. Scrooge hastened to the window of his office and looked in. It was an office still, but not his. The furniture was not the same, and the figure on the chair was not himself. The phantom giant pointed as before. He joined it once again, wondering why and whither he had gone, and accompanied it until they reached an iron gate. He paused to look round before entering. A churchyard. Here then the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay beneath the ground. It was a worthy place, walled in by houses, overrun by grass and weeds, the growth of vegetation, death, not life, choked up too much burying, the fat with repeated appetite, a worthy place. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. He advanced towards it trembling. The phantom was exactly as it had been, but he dreaded that he saw the new meaning of its solemn shape. Before I draw nearer to that stone which you point, said Scrooge, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of things that will be, or are these the shadows of things that may be? Still the ghost pointed to the grave by which it stood. Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which, if preserved, then they must lead, said Scrooge. But if the courses be departed from the ends will change, say it thus, with what you show me. The spirit was immovable as ever. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following it, the finger wrote upon the stone of the neglected grave his own hand. Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I that man who lay upon the bed? He cried upon his knees. The finger pointed the grave to him and back again. No, spirit, oh no. The spirit was still there. Spirit, he cried, tight clutching his rope, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been. But for the intercourse, why show me this if I am past all hope? For the first time the hand appeared to shake. Good spirit, he pursued. As down upon the ground he fell before it. Your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by any kind, by an alternate life. The spirit hand trembled. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all year. All the year. I'll live in the past and the present and the future. The spirit of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone. In his agony he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strung with his entreaty and detained it. The spirit stronger yet repulsed him. Holding up his hands in one last prayer to press his fate, he saw the alteration of the spirit's hand of address. It shrunk and collapsed, dwindled down to a bedpost. And that was the end of Stay 4. We're nearly done, as it ends on page 66 and we're at page 152. Now we're reaching the Stay 5, the end of it. Yes, and the bedpost was his own, the bed was his own, and the room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends to. I will live in a past, present, and a future, Scrooge repeated as he scrambled out of bed. The spirits of free shall strive within me. O Jacob Marley, heaven and Christmas time be praised for this. I will say to my knees, O Jacob, on my knees. He was so fluttered and so glowing with his good intentions that his broken voice could scarcely answer his call. He had been sobbing violently in this conflict with the spirits, and his face was wet with tears. They are not torn down, cried Scrooge, folding his bed curtains in his arms. They are not torn down, rings and all, they are here. I am here, the shadows of the things before me wish well, they will be, I know they will. Sans was busy in his garments of all his time, from inside out, putting them on the upside down, tearing them, mislaying them, making them parties of every kind of extravagance. I don't know what to do, cried Scrooge, laughing in the shame manner of his breath, and making them perfect lacoon for himself in the stockings. I am as light as a feather, I am as happy as an angel, I am as merry as a schoolboy, I am as giddy as a drunken man. A Merry Christmas to everybody, a Happy New Year to all the world. Hello there, whoop, hello. He had frisked into the sitting room, and was now standing there perfectly winded. There's a saucepan that the gruel was in, cried Scrooge, starting off again and frisking round the fireplace. There's a door by which the ghost of Jacob Marley entered. There's a corner by where the ghost of Christmas present sat at. There's a window where I saw the wandering spirits. It's all right, it's all true, it's all happened. Really, for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was plentifully splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the third of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. I don't know what day of the month it is, said Scrooge. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Never mind, I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Hello, whoop, hello, there, here. He was checked in his transports by the churches, ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Clash, clang, hammer, ding, dong, bell. Bell, dong, ding. Hammer, clash, and clash. Oh, glorious, glorious. Running to the wind, he opened it and put it out his head. No fog, no mist, clear, bright, jovial, stirring, cold. Cold piping for the blood to dance to. Golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air. Merry bells, oh, glorious, glorious. What's today? Cried Scrooge, calling down towards a boy in Sunday clothes, who perhaps had loitered in to look about him. Eh? Returned the boy, with all his pride and wonder. What's today, my fine fellow? Said Scrooge. Today? Cried the boy. Why, it's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day, said Scrooge himself. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything like that, of course. They can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello, returned the boy. Do you know the poulterer's in the next street but one at the corner? Scrooge inquired. I should hope they did. An intelligent boy, cried Scrooge. A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've showed the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one. What, the one as big as me, returned the boy. What a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. It's hanging there now, cried the boy. Is it? Cried Scrooge. Go and buy. Walker, exclaimed the boy. No, no, said Scrooge. I'm in earnest. Go buy it, and I'll tell them to bring it here, that I may give them the direction to where to take it to. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him, and I'll give you, in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off of a shot. He must have been a steady hand. At the trigger, he could have shot off perhaps so fast. I'll send the Bob Cratchits, whispered Scrooge, around the back of his head and stood near the laugh. You shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim, and Joe Miller will never be made such a joke as sending it to Bob's will be. And which wrote the address was not a steady one, but one writer he did. Somehow he went down the stairs and opened the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. He stood there, awaiting the arrival, with the knocker caught his eye. I shall love as long as I lived, cried Scrooge, patting it with his hand. I scarcely especially ever looked at it before. What an honest expression it has on his face. What a wonderful knocker. Here's my turkey. Hello, Whoop. How are you? Merry Christmas. It was a turkey. He never could have stood upon his legs, that bird. It would have been snapped him short off in a minute. The sticks of sealing wax. Why, is it possible to carry that to Camden Town? Said Scrooge. You must have a cab. The chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle which he recompensed the boy, were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breakfast in his chair and chuckled until he cried. Shaving was not an easy task, for he continued to shake very much, and shaving requires attention, even when you don't dance while you would at it. But if you had cut the end of his nose off, he would have been put a piece of sticking plaster over it, and been quite satisfied. He dressed himself in all his best, and at last got out on the street. The people would by his time pouring forth, and seen him with the ghost Christmas present, and walking with his hands behind him, Scrooge regarded every one with a light smile. He looked so irresistibly pleasant, in a word, that there were good-humoured fellows said, "Good morning, sir. A Christmas present to you," and Scrooge said often afterwards that all of the blithe sounds he had ever heard, those were the blithest in his ears. He had not gone far when he had come towards him and held the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting office the day before and said, "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe." The same pain across his heart, and the old gentleman would look upon him, but he knew what path lay before him took it. "My dear sir," said Scrooge, quick at his pace. The old gentleman by both his hand, and saying, "How do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. Merry Christmas to you, sir. Mr. Scrooge." "Yes," said Scrooge. "That is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you. Allow me to take Mr. Pardon, and I will have the goodness." Here Scrooge whistled into his ear. "Lord bless me," cried the gentleman. "My dear Scrooge, you are serious." "If you please, not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you. Will you do me a favour, my dear sir?" said the other, shaking his hands with him. "I don't know what to say, such magnificent—" "Don't say anything, please," roared Scrooge. "Come and see me." "Will you come and see me?" "I will," said the gentleman. It was clear he meant to do it. "Thank thee. I am much obliged to you. I thank you 50 times, bless you." He went to the church and walked about the streets, and watched the people hurrying to and fro, and patted the children on the heads, and questioned beggars, and looked down on the kitchen houses and up the windows, and found that everything could yield him pleasure. He had never dreamed that anything could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He passed the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash and did it. Is your master at home, my dear?" said Scrooge to the girl. "Nice girl, very." "Yes, sir." "Where is she, my love?" said Scrooge. "She's at the dining room, sir, with the mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please." "Thank thee. He knows me," said Scrooge, with his hand steady on the dining room lock. "I shall go there, my dear." He turned it gently and sidled his fares in. Inside the door, they were looking at the table, which was spread out in the greater way, for these young housekeepers are always nervous in such points, and like to see that everything is right. "Fred," said Scrooge. "Dear heart alive, how is niece by marriage started?" Scrooge had forgotten for the moment about her sitting in the corner with the footstool. He wouldn't have done it on any account. "Why, bless my soul!" cried Fred. "Who's that?" "It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?" "Let him in." It is a merry that he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home for 5 minutes. Nothing could be hard here. His knees looked down at the same time. So did Topper when he came. So did the plump sister when she came. So did everyone when they came. A wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But it was early in the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first to catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the first thing he set his heart upon, and he did. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9, no Bob, a quarter past, no Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with the door wide open, that he might see him come into the tank. His hat was off before he opened the door. His comforter too, and he was still in jiffy, driving away as he would, trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello," growled Scrooge, in his accustomed voice, as near as good fainted. "What do you mean by coming in by this time of time?" "I'm very sorry, sir. I'm behind my time." "You are?" repeated Scrooge. "You are. Step this way, if you please." "It's only once a year, sir," repeated Bob. "It's not repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "Now, I'll tell you what, my friend," said Scrooge. I'm not going to stand with this sort of thing any longer, and therefore, he continued, leaping from his stool, giving Bob such a dig in the waistcoat that he staggered back again. And therefore, I'm about to raise your salary. Bob trembled, and he got a little near to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it, holding it, and calling to the people in the court to help pull and straight waistcoats. A Merry Christmas, Bob, said Scrooge with an earnestness they could not be mistaken as he clasped on the back. A Merry Christmas, Bob, my good fellow. I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist you in your struggling family, and we'll discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you start another fire, Bob. Cratchit. Scrooge was better than his word. He got on infinitely more, and to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became his good friend and as good as master, and as good a man, and it's the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh and no heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good at which some people did not have their fill of laughter in the outset. And knowing that such as these would be blind anyways, he thought it quite well that they should wrinkle up their eyes and grin, as have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and it was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas smell if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of any of us. And so as Tiny Sin observed, God bless us, everyone. And that was the Christmas Carol. I hope you all enjoyed it. As this is our final ASMR of the year, and we are quite alone, I'm going to end the stream. I had a lot of fun. I hope you all had a lot of fun too. I'll see you all tomorrow when we start our collabs with a collab with our favorite mod, Queen. Oh, I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too. I'll see you all later. Goodbye. Bye.